Chapter 408. Wuming, who had transformed into a Hyenryong dragon, was unprecedentedly powerful in terms of physical strength and magic. After all, the Uruk Hyenryong was Gilgamesh's teacher. However, after using the Sea of Life, Wuming would not choose to fight Gorgon in close combat. After all, there were too many black snakes, and it seemed like there was no limit. These black snakes were not enough to corrode Wuming, but if there were too many of them, Wuming would not be able to move and would be at the mercy of others. It was like the relationship between water and fire. The black snakes were fire, and Wuming was water. Fire could not envelop water, so the black snakes could not bind Wuming. However, if there was enough fire, the water would be evaporated, leaving nothing behind. In simple terms, if Wuming was really injected into the Sea of Life, then he would definitely be forced to leave. However, Wuming's spirit base would be recorded by the Sea of Life, and more Hyenryong would be produced. That would be terrible. Therefore, Wuming could only choose to capture the leader and kill Gorgon first. Then he would need to attack from afar. However, Wuming's long-range attacks were useless. Whether it was his own dragon breath or the loon's magic attacks, they would all be blocked by the black snakes. Gorgon also knew that Wuming would choose to attack him. Gorgon would not let Wuming's plan succeed. There were more than 10 black snakes around him, and once they were reduced, they would immediately replace them. Then there was only one way left. Kill all the black snakes around Gorgon, then kill Gorgon and force him to leave. Wuming's huge eyes emitted a cold gaze. Wuming had considered killing both the black serpent and Gorgon, but killing Gorgon with the black serpent as a shield would be difficult. Gorgon's durability was A++. To put it simply, it wasn't easy to die. But now, it was surrounded by black snakes that were both spears and shields. The difficulty was simply too great. However, Wuming had an idea. "I'm going Gorgon!" Wuming roared as he charged at Gorgon. Hiss! Countless black snakes rushed towards Wuming from all directions, including countless heat rays that could cause true damage to Wuming. The attacking black snakes had to be destroyed. After all, those things were quite difficult to deal with. As for the heat rays, he would try his best to dodge as many as possible. If he couldn't dodge them, he could only defend against them. Even though he couldn't defend against them, Wuming kept dodging one heat ray after another, destroying one black snake after another. His body was getting smaller and smaller. Of course, this was Wuming's intention. After all, moving forward with so many attacks, it was still advantageous to be small. However, Wuming didn't dare to change back to his human form. Not only would all his ability points drop by 1 level, but without the protection of the dragon scales, Wuming's defense would also be greatly weakened. Although Wuming had almost given up on defending, when he was very close to Gorgon, Wuming's body had shrunk to his initial size. Compared to Gorgon, he was almost a quarter of Gorgon's height. "You're giving up. Are you prepared to walk into a trap, Hyenryong?" Gorgon said mockingly. Although that was what he said, Gorgon didn't think that Hyenryong would commit suicide. He must have some plan. Gorgon instantly controlled countless black snakes to surround Wuming and rush towards him. "That's good. What a coincidence. I said I was going to commit suicide." Wuming smiled. Then the loon runes on his body lit up. That was the original 18th loon. Oktyuji Odin. "How dare you?" In an instant, with the release of the noble phantasm real name, and Gorgon's surprised voice, Gorgon and Wuming's eyes fell into a white light. Rumble. In the distance, Uruk. Gilgamesh looked at a 7-colored energy pillar that rose into the sky and smiled. What a pleasant battle. This time Gorgon lost. In front of Babylon, the vine barrier. Woo-woo, Funbaba looked at the 7-colored light pillar worriedly. Funbaba, who had a connection with his master, could sense that his master was in a bad situation. Babylon City, Nippur City. A few servants who were nervously moving the crowd between the two cities also saw the 7-colored light pillar, and were stunned. Not only that, but the citizens who wanted to take advantage of the time when Wuming took Gorgon away were also stunned. They stared blankly at the scene. As expected of Hyenryong-sama, he can actually do this. Shiro Amakusa praised. In the 7-colored light pillar, a huge source of power was the main body. The power of fire and frost complemented each other. The heavy earth and the light wind complemented each other. It was rare that the active life and the silent death did not corrode each other. This was the real great god's seal. It gathered all the power of the Lune runes that Odin sacrificed one of his eyes. It was reproduced in Mesopotamia by Hyenryong, who replaced the Uruk. As for the problem of the noble phantasm, because Okdu Odin was a magic spell on the level of a noble phantasm, there was no reason why Silent Moon, who could use all the runes of Rune, would not be able to use it. After all, Wuming was not a servant that could be judged by the normal servant rules. Oh! Gorgon's scream came from the light pillar. After a while, the seven-colored light pillar disappeared. The smoke produced by the great god's seal almost covered the entire northern battlefield, making it impossible to see the battlefield clearly. The great god's seal, which contained the source of power, destroyed all the black snakes, including the black snakes beside Gorgon. Gorgon was naturally not left behind. He was burned by the great god's seal. The powerful great god's seal had an effect on Gorgon. At this moment, Gorgon's snake hair was destroyed. His scales were falling off. There was not a single part of his body that was intact. Blood was spurting out. Gorgon's huge snake tail was lying on the ground powerlessly. He was also weakly supporting himself on the ground with his hands. Gorgon, who used the Sea of Life's authority, also had the aura of the black mud in his body. Wuming's source of power that restrained each other was contained in the great god's seal. There was no doubt that Gorgon's foundation was damaged. If it wasn't for the fact that it had a durability of A++, and that Gorgon was at the edge of the attack of the Okdu Odin, Gorgon would have disappeared in the colorful light just now. That guy, is he crazy? Gorgon panted slightly and sighed. The reason why Gorgon said that was because of the power of this move. Yes, Gorgon's foundation was damaged, and he was about to die. However, what would happen to Wuming, who had imprinted the origin of the 18 Lune on his body and detonated it? Without a doubt, the answer would be to leave. This was also something that Gorgon did not expect. Wuming would risk the consequences of leaving to detonate himself and die together with him. Uruk Hyenryong, I admit that you won this time. Gorgon closed his eyes and said lightly. However, your plan did not succeed. Even if you hurt me like this, give me a few months and I will be able to recover. Without the Uruk, you can only wait to die. Gorgon suddenly opened his eyes. A scarlet light flashed. I'm sorry, I haven't left yet. A voice came from the surrounding smoke. Then, a golden chain wrapped around Gorgon's neck and pulled him to the ground. Chapter 409. How is this possible? How did you survive that level of explosion? Gorgon lay weakly on the ground. His tone was abnormally terrified. After all, even without the power of origin, the Okdug Odin that had been planned for a long time was enough to blast Gorgon half to death. And how could Wuming be fine in the center of such an explosion? You're right, I couldn't have survived the explosion just now. Wuming said lightly, then walked out of the smoke and dust to Gorgon. The moment Gorgon saw Wuming, he was relieved. Wuming had already returned to his human form from his dragon form, and seemed to be fine. However, that was only possible if one ignored Wuming's transparent body and the Holy Grail that was exposed in his heart. Caught the power of the Holy Grail, and barely survived. Gorgon grabbed the golden chains that bound him. At this moment, Gorgon looked extremely weak, and after a few movements he gave up. Wuming, who should have left, didn't. That was because he caught the power of the Holy Grail, and forced himself to stay here. But looking at Wuming's appearance, he probably wouldn't even last a minute before leaving. A minute was very short, so short that Gorgon couldn't hold on. But a minute was also very long, so long that Wuming could kill the weak Gorgon in a minute. The current Gorgon was at the end of the light crossbow. No, perhaps not even at the end of the light crossbow. Even if Wuming was about to disappear, Wuming's current state could be said to be the final radiance of the setting sun. It should be known that the final radiance of the setting sun was everyone's strongest moment. In this short period of less than a minute, it was enough for Wuming to kill Gorgon. As expected, this is the end of my road. Gorgon gave up struggling. Like a curse, being suppressed by heroes, this was the unchanging end of the path for demons. You don't have to be like this, Gorgon. Wuming looked at Gorgon and shook his head. There's no need for you to play the role of Tiamat. You're Gorgon, no one else. How can you win if you run away and deny yourself? I hate people like you who run away. Wu-ming explained why he hated Gorgon so much. Is that so? I see. Gorgon finally understood before he died. Wu-ming looked at his body. It would disappear in a few seconds. I don't have much time left. Since you've already understood, then go in peace. After Wu-ming finished speaking, he raised his left hand that was not holding the chain. His left hand instantly transformed, and an incomparably huge dragon claw appeared. This was the effect of Wu-ming's noble phantasm. The claw that was condensed with magic power clawed at Gorgon's chest, where the spirit core was located. However, just like in dramas, as long as the opponent was given an explanation before he died, he would definitely lose. Just as Wu-ming's huge dragon claw was about to pierce Gorgon's heart, the silver chain instantly wrapped around Wu-ming's dragon claw and Wu-ming's body. Mother, are you alright? Enkidu suddenly appeared and shouted nervously. You're in luck, Gorgon. Wu-ming's body began to disappear from his feet. The golden heavenly lock that was binding Gorgon also turned into light spots and disappeared. Ah, that's right. I have an underling who cares about my mother. Gorgon was no longer obsessed with Tiamat's identity. Gorgon slowly got up and looked indifferently at Wu-ming, who was about to disappear. Enkidu did not know why, but he also looked at Wu-ming. Through his eyes, Wu-ming could see that he did not have the heart to do so. You've won this battle. In the following days, I won't come out of my temple in the north until I fully recover. Wu-ming pursed his lips helplessly. Gorgon would not be able to recover from the damage caused by this battle without a few months. If she dared to show up, she would be attacked by the other servants. If Gorgon was seriously injured, the servants summoned by Gilgamesh would be able to kill her. I will only send out monsters. I will not appear in person. Consider it your reward for winning. After all, Gorgon had her dignity. She would restrain herself if she lost. However, the one who died was not her, but the winner, Wu-ming. Therefore, Gorgon would not give up on invading the Uruk. As you wish. Wu-ming said indifferently. After Wu-ming finished, Gorgon left toward the north, leaving Wu-ming's head and Enkidu's head behind. Looking at Enkidu, who did not leave, Wu-ming opened his mouth. Although I don't know who you are, I can see that you are not a bad person. It's just that your standpoint is different. Wu-ming smiled at Enkidu. Enkidu was somewhat flustered and blushed. If it's possible, I hope that you can take care of this holy grail. Wu-ming finished speaking and completely disappeared. Clang! The holy grail that was located at Wu-ming's heart fell to the ground. Enkidu thought for a moment, then walked to the place where Wu-ming disappeared, picked up the holy grail, and left. The city of Babylon and the city of Nippur were in the midst of population transfer overnight. Because of the commotion caused by Wu-ming and Tiamat, people were not in the mood to sleep. Coupled with the monster crisis, people were constantly moving people under the arrangement of the servants. Because the monster horde and Gorgon attacked in the middle of the night, it was almost a few hours before the battle between Wu-ming and Gorgon ended. Shiro Amakusa stood on a tall building in the city of Babylon, which had almost completed its population migration, and looked at the battlefield where Wu-ming and Gorgon had settled down in the distance, and did not speak for a long time. Did Hyenryong win? Leonidas appeared behind Shiro Amakusa and asked Shiro Amakusa. Shiro Amakusa nodded, and then shook his head. Hyenryong won, but he also left. Gorgon lost, but he is still alive. This was what Fuma Kotaro said after collecting information. In fact, in the current situation, Wu-ming undoubtedly lost. Now, almost all the servants who saw Gorgon's real body knew that it was not Tiamat who gave birth to the monster, but Gorgon who got Tiamat's personality. Let's go. The north wall is almost finished. It's time to retreat. Then, the three of them left Babylon. Nippur was the same. After Okita Soki and Ba Guzan finished guiding the residents of Nippur, they looked into the distance. Hyenryong-sama failed. Okita Soki said in a low voice. However, knowing that Tiamat is actually Gorgon is quite important. Hyenryong-sama's sacrifice was not in vain. Ba Guzan said firmly. Let's go, it's time to return to the north wall. Uruk, Tower of God. Siduri stood unnaturally beside Gilgamesh, assisting Gilgamesh in handling government affairs. It's almost time to recover, Siduri. Gilgamesh suddenly said. Yes, yes. I'm sorry, King Gilgamesh. Siduri said apologetically. Hyenryong is not dead. It's just a clone that died. Gorgon was seriously injured. Now we have the advantage, so cheer up. Gilgamesh reprimanded. Yes, King Gilgamesh. It's just that I don't know where the Holy Grail is. I have to find it as soon as possible. Gilgamesh said to himself. Then the sun rose. A new morning sun. Gilgamesh did not know what he was referring to. Looking at the rising sun, Siduri's heart was also active. Hyenryong had done a lot for Mesopotamia, and the rest was left to them. Inside the root, the huge root dragon opened its eyes. Chapter 410. Within the root, Wuming opened his eyes. I forgot about the variable using Enkidu's body. The heaven lock is very effective against me. After all, Wuming's rider class clone had extremely high divinity. Even if he had used brute force to break free, Wuming's spirit base would have been destroyed. I'm sorry, Lord Wuming, I didn't help. Enkidu's voice sounded. Wuming looked at the chain on his arm. Of course not, little Enkidu. Didn't you win effortlessly against the Quetzalcoatl? As for the end, you were focused on restraining Gorgon, so it's understandable that you didn't notice the other heaven lock coming. After all, an injured beast was the scariest. It was hard to guarantee that Gorgon wouldn't recover before death. That was why Enkidu had used all his strength to restrain Gorgon, and didn't use another chain to deal with the other heaven lock. Also, we've done enough. Let's leave the rest to Gil and the others. Don't forget that Tachika and the others are also working hard. Don't worry too much. Wuming laughed like an optimist. Looking at Wuming like this, Enkidu felt a little helpless, but he didn't say anything. As long as you're happy, Lord Wuming. Enkidu's tone was light. As long as Lord Wuming didn't feel like he was a burden, it was fine. At this moment, Wuming, who was inside the root, sensed something outside. Did those guys become active because of the influence I caused in Mesopotamia? Wuming opened a lens in front of him, and countless black substances rushed over. Naturally, it was the root black soil that was attacking from outside. But if they only rely on numbers, they're like moths to a flame. How strong was Wuming now? Before coming to the origin, Wuming was no longer afraid of the origin black soil. Now Wuming had stayed in the origin for quite some time. For Wuming, who could absorb the power of origins, to strengthen himself, being inside a great origin was the same as entering a device that could endlessly increase his strength. Wuming sat on the platform at the center of the great source and closed his eyes. In an instant, a blinding white light shot out from Wuming's body, penetrating the origin as if it was nothing. The white light penetrated the origin and went outside. Like the exterior of the universe's great origin, countless pieces of black mud surged forward one after another, like the surface of an ocean in the midst of a storm. However, when the pure white light came into contact with the source of the black mud was like a flame that had come into contact with water and was instantly extinguished. Countless black origin mud were constantly swallowed and destroyed by the pure white light. However, the black origin mud seemed to know no fear and continued to surge forward. It didn't take long for the surging black mud outside the great origin to be completely destroyed. The space outside the great origin regained its mystery and tranquility like the universe. I have to say, if the black origin mud had attacked me while my consciousness was shifting to the servant's clone, the defensive device I set up would have been useless. Then Wuming looked at the back of his dragon claw, which had a black dragon-shaped imprint on it. Crackle crackle. A bolt of lightning streaked across the back of Wuming's dragon claw and erased the black dragon-shaped imprint. Wuming had already memorized the world coordinates of the singularity, so he no longer needed the black imprint. The black dragon-shaped imprint was also responsible for the black origin mud's attack, which was why Wuming chose to dispel it. In that case, Kalas, stay behind and help me manage these defensive tactics, in case those things attack me again while I'm asleep. If a large amount of black origin mud attacked here while Wuming's consciousness was in the servant's clone, it would be really troublesome. If he chose to stay behind to solve the problem, it was very likely that the great origin would be attacked, and Wuming's foundation would be affected. After all, Wuming still needed the power of the Great Origin to grow. If Wuming decisively dispelled the servant's clone, the Great Origin would be saved, but the problem in the servant's world would not be solved, which would be terrible. In other words, if Tachika Fujimaru was in a life-threatening situation, only Wuming could save her. What should he do if the Great Origin was attacked by the Black Origin Mud? Wuming couldn't make the decision to abandon Tachika Fujimaru, but he had to ensure that the Great Origin was absolutely safe, which made him very conflicted. Because of that, if Kala stayed behind and controlled the defensive tactics, Wuming would be able to safely carry out his tasks in another world. Understood, Master. Kalas indifferently replied. Kalas naturally understood this principle, so she immediately agreed. Kalas flew down from Wuming's head, turned into a machine that acted like a central device, and landed inside the Great Origin, on the platform that Wuming was lying on. The platform was very large, and Wuming's shrunken body didn't take up much space. I will help Master guard the house. A screen appeared on the device, displaying what looked like an electrocardiogram. As Kala spoke, the electrocardiogram began to jump. Even if she didn't understand, she had to accept it. Solving problems for her master was her duty as the master's magic attire. Well then, Enkidu will continue to follow me this time. Wuming then said to the chain on his dragon arm. Yes, Enkidu said excitedly. Pfft. Kala spat out in displeasure. After a while, the shadow of a dragon left the Great Origin. But don't misunderstand, that wasn't Wuming's main body. Wuming's main body was sleeping inside the Great Origin. The shadow of the dragon that flew out of the Great Origin was a true clone created by Wuming. After all, the body of a servant was still a bit weak. It would be fine if it was a powerful class, but Wuming always became a class that was disadvantageous to him for various reasons. Therefore, Wuming created a true clone of himself. Using the power of the Great Origin, relying on Wuming's wisdom, and Wuming's own body as the blueprint, he created the Origin Dragon mini-machine. Just like the male version of the Gilgamesh doll made by Wu Ming, he put his consciousness into it and transferred his consciousness into it. Although this Origin Dragon mini-machine was a puppet, it was closer to the servant's spiritual base. After all, it was a product of the Great Origin. How could it be like an ordinary puppet? That was why Wuming completely put his consciousness into it. This Origin Dragon mini-machine had all the abilities of Wuming's main body. However, whether it was the Sword of Salvation, the 12 incarnations, or the Origin Dragon's characteristics, this body could use them all. However, no matter what ability it was, its power was reduced a lot, but it was still better than a simple servant's body. Wuming was going to use this body to go to the singularity where Tachika and the others were now, and help them break through all the singularities as soon as possible. After all, this was a disaster that endangered Ilya world, and it was better to solve it as soon as possible. Wuming came to the long-lost space-time tunnel, and controlled his body to wander inside. Just as Wuming was about to enter the singularity where Tachika was, Wuming heard a voice. God-sama, if there is a God-sama among humans, why didn't he show up to save us? This sentence contained many emotions: hatred, hope, numbness. Wuming was attracted by these emotions, stopped moving, and thought, is this the strong longing of other worlds received by my body? Wuming thought for a while, then gave up entering Tachika's world, and turned to the place where the voice came from. Interesting. Hating the gods yet hoping for the gods. What kind of world is this? Let me take a look. Wuming opened the space-time portal of that world, and went in. Chapter 411. The sky was dark and gloomy. Endless thick fog and dark clouds covered the sky, and not a single ray of sunlight shone on the earth. The land was desolate. It was either cracked land or land full of strange plants. In short, it was a tragic sight that was unbearable to look at. It was desolate everywhere. Disgusting. This was the sigh of the white dragon that had just come out of the space-time tunnel. Wuming could feel that everywhere was filled with dead silence. The land had lost its vitality, the sea had dried up, the sky was covered, and the air was filled with an unpleasant smell. All of this was nauseating. Wuming flew in the sky, looking at the world that looked like the end of the world, and fell into deep thought. Wu-Ming did not need to visually estimate. Through the attributes of the atmosphere and the current state of the earth, Wu-Ming could tell that the entire world was probably covered in dark clouds and smoke. No wonder there was such a sad sigh. It would be strange not to be sad living in such a world. Wu-Ming shook his head. I'm afraid it's an unknown world. I'd better use some concealment tactics on myself first. With these thoughts, Wu-Ming mobilized magic power, and then he found that there was no magic power in this world, but there was another kind of energy. Not magic power? This is really interesting. Wu-Ming laughed. The worlds that Wu-Ming had been to before were all worlds with magic power, but this world did not have magic power, but another special power which attracted Wu-Ming's attention. However, this is not difficult for me. Several tactics appeared and covered Wu-Ming's body. The tactic that blocked detection was successfully used by Wu-Ming. Then Wu-Ming looked around, found a place to land, and flew over. Boom! In a natural cave, a ball of white flame burst out from inside. Plop! A huge corpse that looked like a multi-legged centipede fell to the ground, then turned into dust and collapsed. Really, why is there danger everywhere? Is there no safe place in this world? Wu-Ming's voice was heard. Wu-Ming extinguished the flame on his hand and walked into the cave. At this moment, Wu-Ming was wearing a black hooded cloak. After entering the cave, Wu-Ming took off the hood and then looked around the cave. I have to say this giant centipede is really neat. I was thinking if it was like that tentacle-like thing's place was full of mucus, or if it was like that bear-like thing's cave was full of feces and skeletons, then I'd have to change places again. Wu-Ming said with some relief. Then, Wu-Ming sat down in the cave. As for why Wu-Ming came back here, it had to start from the moment he landed. After Wu-Ming landed, he recovered his human form. After all, it was a weakened version of the power of the root, so it was natural that he could turn into a human. Then, Wu-Ming began to look for a place to rest. After a few twists and turns, he finally found a decent place. During this process, Wu-Ming discovered that there were things that Wu-Ming didn't know about almost everywhere on the ground. Poisonous flowers, black dust that could corrode flesh, an atmosphere that made it difficult for living creatures to survive, and various monsters. At the thought of those things, Wu-Ming had a headache. If humans can survive here, we'll be thankful to the heavens and earth. As for why Wu-Ming could use magic in this world without magic. After all, Wu-Ming was a dragon of the root, a noble and mysterious existence born from the root. And all worlds were born from the root, so it wasn't hard to understand why Wu-Ming could use the energy of other worlds. This power is quite interesting. As he said that, Wu-Ming extended a finger. Specks of golden light appeared on Wu-Ming's hand, and slowly condensed into a ball of light. Wu-Ming controlled the ball of light to move, and then returned to his finger. Energy with life, how interesting. Wu-Ming dispelled the ball of light, and the ball of light turned into energy and dissipated in the air. As the name implied, these energies had life, but they wouldn't die. After these energies were used up, they would come to the atmosphere, and become part of the atmosphere's energy. Let's not talk about that for now. In such an environment, can humans really survive? Wu-Ming sighed. After all, the environment of this world was a little too harsh. However, regarding whether or not there were humans, Wu-Ming only expressed his opinion with a sigh. There must be humans alive. Putting aside the fact that Wu-Ming was attracted by a certain human's words, humans weren't creatures that would perish easily. But if that's all, how could humans be forced to this point? Wu-Ming said, somewhat puzzled. If it was really only the threat that Wu-Ming saw just now, then with the wisdom of humans, Wu-Ming didn't believe that they couldn't deal with it. And at that moment, there was a roar. Boom boom. The cave Wu-Ming was in was directly buried, and Wu-Ming was buried alive. Outside, a huge dragon was flying, facing off against a group of beings that looked like robots. The robots that looked like humans flew in the sky as if they were on standby, waiting for the dragon to attack. Roar. The dragon roared at the group of beings that looked like robots, and then a dragon's breath condensed in its mouth. Boom! The dragon's breath exploded at the robots, making a huge roar. That's right. It seemed like this was the culprit that caused the cave to collapse and bury Wu-Ming. The powerful dragon's breath shot at the group of flying robots. No matter how one looked at it, these robots couldn't possibly withstand it. However, these robots moved. A circular magical formation was cast by many robots, blocking in front of these robots. Then, the dragon's breath sprayed on this translucent magical formation. Immediately after, the dragon's breath was easily diverted by the magical formation like a ray of light shining on a mirror. An incomparably terrifying dragon's breath swept across the surrounding area, causing a series of explosions. Boom! Yes, I'm afraid that the dragon's breath will attack the cave Wuming is in. These robots will be helpful too. Roar! As if seeing that its attack was diverted, the dragon roared angrily. Damn it! You bunch of scrap metal! A huge roar came from the dragon's mouth. Attack refraction complete. Target confirmed. Dragon spirit, begin annihilation. The robot flying at the front of the group of robots was like a leader, muttering. The robots stretched out their hands, and magical formations appeared from their hands, as if they were ready to annihilate the so-called dragon spirit in front of them. The leader robot spoke. Pseudo-cannon. At that moment, Wuming's voice was heard. I see. It's because of your existence that humans can't survive. Chapter 412. Who's there? The giant dragon looked around and roared vigilantly. The robots that were ready to attack also stopped moving and waited while scanning the surroundings. Just a traveler, don't worry about it. A voice suddenly came from the middle of the dragon and robots, and Wuming's figure appeared there. What? When did you appear? I didn't even notice you. The giant dragon said in surprise. In his perception, the place where Wuming was located did not have the slightest energy fluctuation. It was like a mass of air. This was the effect of Wuming's shielding technique. Not only was there the magic of Yggdrasil, World Tree, but there was also the magic of Loon magic. The auxiliary magic of Yggdrasil, World Tree, was quite powerful. Without special skills or tools, it was impossible to detect it. Although the robots didn't look surprised, judging from the weapons they raised, these robots were also very vigilant. Scanning. There is no information about this person in the database. Unable to determine his race. Temporarily determined to be an unknown species. Current status unknown, suspected to be hostile, the robot leader said in a cold tone. Forget about this group of Kikai species. Which race are you from? Do you want to poke your nose into my business? The giant dragon said in a rather irritable tone. Because it could not see the details of the enemy, it was even more irritable since it was already released from prison. Even the robots with the database could not find out Wuming's identity, let alone this giant dragon. Is this world divided into forces by race? The two sides are called dragon and Kikai species. Wuming looked at the giant dragon, then looked at the robots. Through the information exchanged between the two sides, Wuming also understood their race. The giant dragon was the dragon, and the robots were called Kikai species. It was a very appropriate and simple name. Do you think I wanted to? I was obediently waiting in the cave over there. You guys buried me with an explosion, so I had no choice but to come. Wuming pointed at the cave that had turned into a pile of rubble, and said helplessly. Speaking of which, I need some information. I wonder who can provide it to me. Just treat it as an apology. Wuming maintained his smile as he looked at the giant dragon and Kikai, waiting for their reply. This group has no reason to provide you with information. This group refuses, said the leader of the mechas. Even so, the group of mechas didn't make any other moves. They only maintained their defensive stance. However, for these Kikai species, as long as they didn't attack them, they wouldn't retaliate. However, to the arrogant and hot-tempered dragon elite, the colossal dragon elite, who thought highly of themselves and had to hand over information just because they provoked them, the colossal dragon elite thought, "Who are you? Do you want to die? If you want information, you'll have to survive my attacks first," roared the colossal dragon. Then, it opened its mouth and countless energy that was different from magic power gathered in it. Then it shot it at Wuming. The scorching dragon's breath was shot at Wuming. The surrounding air had begun to distort due to the high temperature. Perhaps even steel would be melted by the dragon's breath. To be able to defend and reflect this attack, it seems that these Kikai species are not to be trifled with. Wuming looked at the Kikai species that didn't move and thought in his heart. Then, Wuming looked at the attack that was coming at him. However, in the face of such a powerful attack, Wuming didn't do anything. Boom! There was a big explosion at Wuming's position. Because the speed of this attack was really too Wuming. Too slow. Wuming's voice came from behind the colossal dragon. What? How is that possible? The colossal dragon was in disbelief. Although the Kikai species' faces didn't change much, their eyes that were constantly producing data also exposed their inner situation. This was the effect caused by Wuming using the phoenix incarnation that was activated in an instant to teleport. However, because the body wasn't the original body, the duration of the phoenix incarnation was reduced to 1 second. However, 1 second was enough for Wuming. Then it's my turn. Wuming smiled slightly and then began to chant. Seeing Wuming chanting, the colossal dragon was very disdainful. For the dragon spirit race that had extremely high magic resistance, if it wasn't the forest spirit race that was best at using magic, there was no need to pay attention to other people's magic. But, I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. No matter if it's a human or a devil, I will defeat any enemy that stands in my way. Seeing Wuming who was just chanting, the colossal dragon felt a sense of crisis. It can cause me harm. And when Wuming finished chanting, the colossal dragon felt that something was wrong. I must stop him. The colossal dragon's inner alarm bell rang. When Wuming was chanting, the colossal dragon attacked. Die! The colossal dragon roared and turned around to wave its giant claws at Wuming. For the dragon spirit race that had extremely high physical fitness, in addition to using magic, its physical strength was also super strong. Except for a few races, almost no one of the races could take a claw from the dragon spirit race. However, when the dragon spirit race swung its claws at Wuming, Wuming raised his fist that was quite young for the colossal dragon. However, it was this hand that gave the colossal dragon an even more incomparably dangerous feeling. Because this body was weakened, Wuming was prepared to add a strengthening spell. You have shining yellow. Well, forget it. It would be troublesome if I accidentally killed you. However, after thinking for a while, Wuming stopped the strengthening spell. Just like Wuming said, it would be troublesome if he killed it directly. Wuming still needed information. Wuming's words naturally reached the colossal dragon's ears, but this made the colossal dragon even angrier. The colossal dragon swung its claws even faster. Then, the colossal dragon's claws collided with Wuming's fist. Generally speaking, when a huge figure that was hundreds of meters tall faced a weakling that was less than 2 meters tall, the weaker side would lose. However, Wuming wasn't a weakling, but a super strong one. Boom! The colossal dragon that collided with Wuming's fist was slammed into the ground, leaving a dragon-shaped groove on the ground full of gravel. How is this possible? The colossal dragon that fell into the groove of the ground. Its bones were broken, some were even shattered, and it was almost unable to move. It said slowly in an unbelievable tone. Then the colossal dragon fainted. The unknown new species has a few powerful brute force. It is not recommended to face it head-on. Temporarily retreat. The leader of the mech armors analyzed and said. Then a diamond-shaped space opened behind these mech armors, and the mech armors began to retreat. Did I say you can go again? Chapter 413. Did I say that I would let you go again? Wuming's voice rang out. However, this did not affect the departure of the Jikai bastards. There's no fear at all. Wuming said gloomily. He didn't feel any fear from Jikai. However, I can't just let you leave like this. Since they were called the Mechai species, they must have something like a database. For Wuming, who wanted information, this was like finding a water source in the desert. He couldn't let it go. Well, but I don't need that many mecha seeds. As the leader, you're pretty good. After all, the leader usually had the most information, right? Little n. After saying that, Wuming cast Heavenlock on leader Kikai who had already entered the dimensional space. Bang. However, the heaven lock that had just entered bounced back out. What? Wu-ming was a little surprised. Although heaven lock was not an offensive weapon, this was the first time Enkidu had failed to achieve anything. Putting away heaven lock, Wu-ming looked at the closed dimensional space and gave up on the idea of capturing leader Kikai. Perhaps the performance of the machines was different. Compared to the leader of the mechanical triumphant race which had already closed its dimensional gate, there were a few mechanical triumphant races which had yet to close their dimensional gates. Looking at the speed at which they closed the dimensional door, this was more than enough for Wu-ming. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you a curse. Evil people can't hit me. After quickly chanting the incantation, Wu-ming instantly arrived in front of a randomly selected Mecha Triumph type dimensional door and went in. Pseudo-reflex, pseudo-reflex. Accompanied by the emotionless robotic lowly voice, a barrier appeared in front of Wu-ming who had just entered the dimensional door. When Wu-ming saw this barrier, he understood that the mechanical triumphant race could use a kind of reflex ability. Enkidu was caught off guard by the mechanical triumphant race's reflective barrier just now. But, you're still too young to deal with me. Wu-ming's Phoenix avatar didn't simply increase Wu-ming's speed, but it reduced the flow of time around him and accelerated his own time to reach super high speed. This involved the power of time. In this way, not only Wu-ming's physical speed, but also Wu-ming's consciousness and reaction ability. As a result, Wu-ming easily bypassed the barrier amidst his opponent's extremely slow movements. With a wave of his hand, the heavenly lock appeared and bound this mecha triumphant race. Then, Wu-ming accelerated and pulled the mechanical triumphant race out of the dimensional door. Wu-ming looked at the rest of the mechanical triumphant race that had been completely sealed and retreated, and he didn't say anything. Well, even if it's an ordinary mechanical triumphant race, I'm already satisfied to know the basic information of this world. Then, Wu-ming looked at the mechanical triumphant race that was tied up by him. Because of the mechanical triumphant race being tied up by the mechanical triumphant race, it could no longer use its magical power to fight back, and the power of a mechanical triumphant race alone was not enough to break free from the mechanical triumphant race. It was a female mechanical triumphant race, and it was a lowly of about 10 years old. A small part of its body was covered by metal armor. From neck to chest, the entire lower abdomen, and below thighs were all mechanical metal, and a large number of mechanical metal structures were exposed in the elbows, shoulders, waist, and abdomen. There were several mechanical wings behind it, which didn't look like they were used to assist in flight, but more like combat support. There was a rather complicated mechanical intelligence disc on the right side of its head, which looked quite mysterious. Its eyes were yellow in alert mode full of data, and there was an analytical lens in front of its left eye. There was also a long-barreled technology gun for combat on its arm, as well as some other auxiliary machinery. After all, Wu-ming didn't know much about these things, and he didn't pay much attention to them. In addition, there were two tail-like cables behind the mechanical triumphant race's body, which gave Wu-ming the feeling of an antenna. The most obvious thing was the gorgeous rose-colored knee-length hair of this mechanical triumphant race, as well as its beautiful face. Although her messy long hair looked quite unkempt, it gave people a very soft feeling. Wu-ming touched the mechanical triumphant race's hair, and sure enough, it was quite soft, but the toughness of the mechanical triumphant race's hair was super strong. Soft steel wire can be compared to this. Prompt: the connection has been cut off from this machine. You can't invade the connection through this machine. The mechanical triumphant race said. Sure enough, it's worthy of being a machine life. It was abandoned after being captured. Wu-ming said helplessly, but there was nothing he could do about it. According to reason, it was just an ordinary mechanical triumphant race member. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't choose to fight against an unknown enemy who could knock out a dragon spirit with one punch. Often, a programmed machine system was the most rational existence. I can only say that it's worthy of being called a mechanical triumphant race. Wu-ming sighed. I received an order when I was cut off from the host's computer to initiate the self-destruction program. I can't leave any information to the enemy. The self-destruction program, countdown, start dash, the mechanical triumphant race lowly said blankly, and then began to mumble. However, although Kakai was a robot, it was actually a product of mystery. To put it simply, it was not a science, it was still a magic. Question: the self-destruction program can't be started. The elf can't be used, the self-destruction program failed to start. Mechanical Triumphant Race said faintly. Of course. Your body's energy has already been restrained. How can you use your ability? Wu Ming couldn't let the database that he had worked so hard to obtain run away. I repeat, I will not provide you with any information. Mechanical Triumphant Race looked at Wu Ming indifferently, and did not do anything else. With such a tough attitude, it's impossible to get any information. After all, no matter how hard you torture a machine, it would only make others think that you're destroying her, which had nothing to do with the abandoned Mechanical Triumphant Race. Collis is not here, it's a bit inconvenient. After all, Collis was similar to Mechanical Triumphant Race, but Collis was not as emotionless as Mechanical Triumphant Race. Since being tough didn't work, Wu Ming didn't force it. After all, there was still someone over there who could get information. With that in mind, Wu Ming looked at the unconscious dragon over there. Then Wu Ming said to the Mechanical Triumphant Race, "If that's the case, then I won't get any information from you. Tell me your name first. The order you received was not to leak information, right? Things like names can't be considered information. After all, it's not easy to address someone without a name." After pondering for a moment, the Mechanical Triumphant Race spoke. Mechanical Triumphant Race serial number C207PR4F57T9. What I want is a name. Don't you have a name? Wu Ming was even more helpless. Were the Mechanical Triumphant Race really just machines? I don't understand. The Mechanical Triumphant Race was silent. After a moment of silence, Mechanical Triumphant Race spoke again. Question: what about Hubletus? Let's call her that for the time being. After all, this was the name she gave herself, so she would use it as such for the time being, although it didn't look like a name at all. Then, Hubletus, as the price for not getting any information from you, you need to follow me. Do you agree? Wu Ming looked into Hubletus' eyes and said. Agreed, Hubrick said curtly. Then, let's see what we can get out of this giant dragon. Wu Ming looked at the giant dragon. Chapter 414. After that, Wu Ming gently woke up the dragon that was unable to move due to the broken bones in its body. Later, under the dragon's horrified expression, Wu Ming successfully gently extracted a lot of information. This world was called Disbode. It was a world where gods existed. These gods were called Old Deus. The energy of this world was not magic, but a kind of energy called spirit. That's right, it was the energy with life on Wu Ming's finger. Phantasma, created by God. There were all kinds of phantasma, so there was no uniform appearance. Dragonia, created by God, had the appearance of a dragon. It had extremely high magic ability and magic resistance, and its physical fitness was also extremely strong. It could also use its past and future power in the present. It could be said to be an extremely powerful race. Gigant, created by the gods. As the name suggested, the giants were extremely tall and had extremely strong physical attributes. They were a powerful race that could compete with the dragon goblins. They had always been on good terms with the goblins. The Skywings Flugel were god-killing weapons created by God. They had extremely powerful strength that could kill god species. They looked like a group of humans with wings and had extremely long lifespans. They were currently living in the city formed by the fantasy breed Abanti Heim. They had built a city in the sky called Abanti Heim. In addition, they were also a race with a strong thirst for knowledge. Because of this thirst for knowledge, they would collect all kinds of books. They once emptied all the books in the capital of Forest Elves. When it came to Skywing, they had to talk about the god who created them, the god of war Artesius. According to what Wu Ming learned from the dragon spirit seed, the god spirit seed Arthas was the most powerful god spirit among all the gods. According to gossip, these Skywing were actually created by Artesius to kill him, so he felt that he was too strong, and no one could defeat him, so he created god of war Artesius to fight him. Wu Ming was quite interested in this god of war. The forest elves were created by the gods and created a large variety of magic. Their characteristic was their long ears. In terms of magic attainment, they could be said to be the strongest existence among all species. Goblins were created by the gods. They had dark skin and looked like the dwarves in the myths who forged weapons for the gods. Although their magical attainments were not as good as the forest goblins, they were not to be underestimated. Strictly speaking, the goblins' magical attainments were in the aspect of manufacturing. They were able to create magical tools and weapons. It was said that the goblins had even created a magic airship. The fairy race was created by God, and could be said to be in existence similar to the forest elves. They had an extremely good relationship with the forest elves and were allies. Ex Machina, created by God, usually acted in groups. The Ex Machina were basically linked together, existing in the form of the Internet. The Mechai species had super advanced calculation abilities. Through the Mechai species' equipment and their own abilities, refracting the dragon breath of the dragon elite species was a piece of cake. Other than that, as long as they had been attacked once or seen a strategy, it would no longer be useful. Moreover, they could design the same weapon. In theory, they could be infinitely powerful. It was simply a bug. However, they could be said to be a group of people who would not attack others unless they were attacked. As long as no one provoked them, they would not provoke others for no reason. God knows what that dragon elite species did to provoke the Mechai species. The Demonia race was created by God. In simple terms, they were some demons that lived on the earth. The giant centipede that Wuming encountered before belonged to the Demonia race. Speaking of which, the god who created this race was really disgusting. Wuming thought of those tentacles and mucus again. The Damper race was created by God. In simple terms, they were life forms similar to vampires. They could not live without sucking blood. Lunamana, a race created by God on the huge red moon. By the way, there were 2 moons in this world, and they existed both day and night. Rather than calling them moons, it would be more accurate to call them satellites that were extremely close to this planet and moved in the same orbit. The Werbeast race was created by God. They were basically beastmen. They did not have elves in their body, and they could not use magic, but they had physical abilities that surpassed the limit. The Siren race was created by God. They could only live in the water, and could not go ashore. They looked like mermaids. Because all of them were women, they needed men from other races to help them produce offspring. Because the Siren race had rich water essence in their body, a kind of elves, they had the ability to attract other elves, and having water essence in their body was equivalent to having a natural charm skill. So it was quite helpful for the Siren race to reproduce. In addition to these races, there was also a kind of intellectual creature, human beings. Human beings were not created by God. Not only did they not have elves in their body, they could not use magic, and they did not have excellent physical fitness like the orc race. It could be said that human beings were the weakest intellectual creatures. Therefore, human beings were not called human race by other races, they were simply called human beings. But that was not a big deal. Even if they were weak, they could still survive in this big family of many races. Just like in a fairy tale, the world created God, and God created various races, which made the world more colorful. It was originally like this. The gods and the various races they created lived peacefully in the world. Then, because of the selfish desires of their creators, several races went to war with each other under the command of their creators. The powerful gods, because they all wanted to be the only god, began an endless battle to compete for the throne of the only god. According to the dragon spirit, the war that affected the world has lasted for a year, and it was not very clear when it started. The races that went to war kept fighting, and the races that didn't want to go to war kept quiet. But according to the dragon spirit, those races that didn't want to go to war were killed by other gods, so they didn't go to war. After all, the races went to war because of the order of their creators. However, it was good to have one less enemy, and other races didn't bother them. But only human beings, other races didn't pay attention to them. Even if they were affected, they wouldn't care. Even other races didn't regard human beings as a life form on the same level as themselves. Why was that? The dragon spirit said the reason. because human beings were weak. Wu-Ming also guessed that a race that was not created by God, had a short lifespan, had no elves in their body, couldn't use magic, had low physical fitness, and posed no threat. How could they be valued by other races? The weak had no right to speak. That was the cruelty of the world. Chapter 415. This is also why I heard that sigh. Wu-Ming was relieved. How could he be willing to be looked down upon and trampled on like this? However, even so, humans continued to exist and survive in this world war that had lasted for tens of thousands of years. No matter how desperate or unfavorable it was, humans still continued to struggle at death's door. As expected, this is how humans should be. Wu-Ming walked on the road and smiled. Hubletus followed behind Wu-Ming obediently. Facing Wu-Ming's smile, Hubletus was very puzzled. I'm puzzled. Why is Nameless smiling so happily? The human race was clearly on the verge of collapse. Hubletus can't understand. By the way, Hubletus asked Wu-Ming for his name after he had a name, but we told him that he was just a nameless passerby and didn't need to remember. Therefore, Hubletus called Wu-Ming Nameless. This made no difference to Wu-Ming. After Wu-Ming heard Hubletus's question, he stopped and turned around. But even so, humans continue to live. Don't underestimate humans too much, Hubletus. Maybe at some point, humans will do something unexpected. Hubletus tilted his head, still puzzled. Hubletus, I don't understand. Also, because Wu-Ming had asked Hubrick to call himself by his name since he already had a name, he didn't need to call himself this machine anymore. Therefore, Hubrick changed this machine to Hubrick. However, Wu-Ming simply patted her head in the face of such a Hubrick. You really don't understand now, but I'll think of a way to make you understand. Wu-Ming smiled. Even if he couldn't get information from Hubletus, Wu-Ming didn't let him go. Therefore, Wu-Ming had a plan to let Keikai gain feelings. It was clearly a life created by God, but it had no feelings, whether it was taken away or not. This was the only thing that made Wu-Ming quite unhappy. Therefore, Wu-Ming set two small goals. He wanted to save the humans of this world and let Keikai have feelings. Then does this have anything to do with what Ben Hubrick is wearing? Hubrick pointed at the clothes he was wearing. Wu-Ming took out a large hooded cloak that he had used for adventuring in the past from the Golden Ripples, modified it, and put it on Hubletus. By the way, Wu-Ming was now wearing a hooded cloak that he once used for adventuring. Hubrick is a Keikai species. Hubrick doesn't need to wear clothes. He doesn't need to hide his identity when he's by John Doe's side. Why should he wear clothes? After saying that, Hubrick tugged at his clothes again. As everyone knew because of the Keikai species' consciousness and their mechanical bodies, the Keikai species basically didn't wear clothes. The only cover they wore was the armor that they would only wear in battle. Although they weren't as attractive as the human body. Cough cough. At least that's what Wu-Ming thought. No matter what, he wouldn't be in heat because of a blow-up doll. Moreover, Wu-Ming was going to let Hubrick gain feelings. First of all, he had to let Hubrick have a human sense of honor and disgrace. Most importantly, who the F***ck knew that Keikai species usually didn't wear clothes. Wu-Ming had already given up. After all, Hubrick was still at the level of treating him as a tool. He couldn't rush it. Let's take it slow. Well, actually, my identity is very mysterious. In order not to expose me, I put you in disguise. Wu-Ming explained awkwardly. Yes, by the way, the Earth Dragon spirit that Wu-Ming questioned had been healed and released by Wu-Ming. It would be great if the Earth Dragon spirit didn't expose Wu-Ming's information, but it would be even better if he passed on the news of Wu-Ming to other races. He broke and even shattered all the bones of an adult Earth Dragon spirit with one punch. And it was done with mercy. Wu-Ming estimated that if this news reached the ears of the god of war Artesius, he would probably be very excited. Because, even the Skywing species, known as the god-killing weapon, needs everyone to work together to suppress an adult Earth Dragon spirit like me. Even the person from the Skywing species had to risk his life to barely suppress an adult Earth Dragon spirit like me. But you actually defeated me with one punch. Who the hell are you? These were the words of the extremely weak Earth Dragon spirit at that time. To be honest, the Earth Dragon spirit really had an advantage in this world. resistance to magic, extremely strong magic abilities, the ability to gather the power of the future and the past for use in the present, and an extremely strong physical body. It could be said that a long time ago, in addition to the god species occupying the top position, and the fantasy species being rare, the second most powerful race was the Earth Dragon spirit. However, unfortunately, that could only be in the past. Now the Earth Dragon spirit was almost out of people. Hint, the Kikai species had once fought with the Dragon Essence species. In the end, all the members of the Dragon Essence species that participated in the battle were wiped out. Previously, when Wu Ming was puzzled, Zayubrek explained as such. Although Zayubrek did not tell Wu Ming the specific situation, Wu Ming could almost guess it. The Earth Dragon spirit had used the ability to copy the Earth Dragon spirit's attack, and attack the Earth Dragon spirit, wiping out all the Earth Dragon spirit that participated in the battle. As a result, there weren't many Dragon Essence seeds left now. Coincidentally, the creator of the Earth Dragon spirit had died. As a result, the Earth Dragon spirit was at an even greater disadvantage. At that time, the Earth Dragon spirit had also looked at Zayubrek with resentment. It seemed that the battle between the Earth Dragon spirit and the Earth Dragon spirit was not an accident. By the way, according to the Earth Dragon spirit, after witnessing the power of the Earth Dragon spirit, the various races had ordered that they were strictly prohibited from provoking the Earth Dragon spirit. Back to the topic, if the Earth Dragon spirit spread the news, although other races and even gods would be vigilant, it would pose a threat to the various gods and races. An unknown powerhouse comparable to the god species was wandering casually on the ground. Once this news spread, the other races would pay attention when they fought wantonly. If they accidentally provoked that unknown expert, it would definitely be a business that would only be a loss. So where is John Doe going? Zayubrek asked. Of course, it's a place where there are humans, Wu Ming said without hesitation. Firstly, he would be able to observe and help the humans of this world. Secondly, if he wanted Zayubrek to have human emotions, he would have to let her live in the human world. As for Wu Ming, he was just a non-human who understood humans very well. Then let's set a small goal first. Find the humans. With that said, two figures, one big and one small, wearing black cloaks, walked in a certain direction, moving forward unhurriedly. Chapter 416. Because Wu Ming did not deliberately search for traces of humans, Wu Ming and Zayubrek slowly advanced on the ground. Along the way, because Wu Ming used a shielding spell, they did not encounter any trouble. They only encountered a few demons who were lucky enough to see Wu Ming and Zayubrek. Then these demons were treated as human beings by the Wu Ming cult. Wu Ming saw many people of other races. Because of the shielding spell, they did not discover Wu Ming and Zayubrek. However, many times, these hostile races did not attack. Instead, they were vigilant and left after a few words. It seemed like the dragon spirit had spread the news of Wu Ming. And now, these races had restrained themselves a little. Wu Ming and Zayubrek continued to search for traces of humans on the ground. Because the two of them did not need to eat, their speed was not slow. At this moment, Wu Ming and Zayubrek arrived above a cliff canyon. There are elven skeletons everywhere. Wu Ming sighed as he looked at the tiny grayish-white objects floating in the sky like snow, and the scene of the ground covered in snow. No wonder the ground was desolate. There were snowy mountains everywhere, and there were piles of skeletons that could destroy the bodies of creatures everywhere. It was not incomprehensible for the ground to be desolate. Moreover, these elven skeletons sometimes changed like the weather, like heavy snow and light snow. It was not surprising that the density of the skeletons would increase from time to time. Hint: Zayubrek has the removal liquid to remove elven skeletons in his body. He is not afraid of these skeletons, Zayubrek said as he stood behind Wu Ming with his hood on. Well, I'm not afraid. Wu Ming shrugged. These skeletons were still 20,000 years away from corroding the scales of a dragon of origin. There are a lot of elven reactions below. What do you think it is, Zayubrek? Wu Ming asked with a smile, like a brother guessing a riddle for his sister. Hubrek's eyes changed, and data flowed through his eyes. Then Hubrek spoke. A goblin's magic airship that crashed, Hubrek said calmly. You're really unromantic. I didn't mean to ask you what's down there, Wuming said with a wry smile. Hubrick doesn't understand. Hubrick continued to tilt his head in confusion. Well, forget it. It's unrealistic to make you look like a human now. Wuming shrugged, then began to think about Zayubrick's words. A gnome's magic airship that crashed? Wuming stroked his chin, considering if he should go and take a look. Question. Does John Doe want to go down and take a look? Hubrick said expressionlessly. Since it's a crashed magic airship, let's go down and take a look. After making the decision, Wuming and Hubrick came to the bottom of the canyon in their own ways. As soon as they reached the bottom of the canyon, they saw a huge bronze airship. However, it was a dilapidated magic airship that was half destroyed. It looked like it had been there for some time. Visually, this airship was hundreds of meters long. It had to be said that the goblins were really interesting to be able to create such a huge aircraft. Wuming sized up this place and felt the increasingly rich elven bones. Wuming spoke. Let's go in first. After all, even if the elven bones couldn't cause harm to the two of them, no one would like to stay under threat. When it was drizzling, even if it didn't affect them much, who wouldn't want to use an umbrella if they had one? Of course, except for those who like to get wet. Then Hubrick nodded faintly and followed Wuming in. But, did something occupy this place after the magic airship crashed? It's treating this place as its own nest. Wuming felt that there was a biological reaction inside this stronghold. There was no doubt that there was some creature in this airship. However, with Wuming's strength, there was no need to be afraid of those things unless the divine seed came. At this moment, Wuming stopped. Someone is coming, Wuming said. That's right, in Wuming's perception there were 3 humans. Hubrick, you can use optical camouflage, right? Wuming asked. After all, this was a necessary ability for a robot. Confused? Optical camouflage? Hubrick tilted his head and said doubtfully. That's the way, Wuming said and cast an invisibility spell on himself. Wuming's entire person disappeared. Understood pseudo-reflex. Hubrick said and activated a device on his body. Then, Hubrick also disappeared. Refracted the light through a reflective mirror? Wuming nodded. However, compared to Wuming's concealment, Hubrick's position still had the elf. Simply put, it was the magic residue. Sure enough, simply refracting the light in this magical world is still a bit insufficient. With that said, Wuming waved his hand and eliminated Hubrick's residual elf reaction. Stay aside, don't make any movements, and don't make any noise, Wuming said. Although Wuming couldn't see Hubrick's face, Hubrick's voice came. Understood. Then the scene fell into silence. After a few minutes, 3 silhouettes quietly sneaked over from afar. Wuming had a good look at their appearances. They were wearing gray and brown hooded cloaks, scarves that served as masks, large goggles, tattered pants, and brown boots. It could be said that there was not a single part of their bodies that was exposed to the outside world. Their clothes looked quite shabby, but Wuming was sure that they were indeed human. The 3 of them leaned against the wall of the magic airship and squatted down. How's the compass? One of the rough voices came from one of them, and the person who spoke was an uncle. After hearing the middle-aged man's question, one of the 3 who seemed to be the leader stretched out his hand from under the cloak. Even the hand that was hidden under the cloak was covered with gloves. It seemed like he was fully armed. He was holding a compass disc in his hand. The needle on the disc was constantly spinning, and it looked like it was broken. Sure enough, the compass is no longer useful because of the black ash. The leader frowned. Now we can only rely on our own eyes to find the enemy. Be careful, Ivan Ol. The leader called out their names. Yes. The 2 people behind the leader nodded heavily. The black ash is getting thicker. Hurry up. With that, the 3 of them sneaked into the magic airship. After the 3 of them entered the interior of the magic airship, Wuming and Hubrick revealed themselves. Do you see that, Hubrick? The humans are still trying to survive. Hubrick didn't answer Wuming, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Let's go. There's a big guy here. Without us, I'm afraid they'll be at risk of being wiped out. Then, Wuming and Hubrick entered the magic airship and disappeared again. Chapter 417. Wuming didn't immediately follow the three humans. Instead, he took his time to tour the magic airship. Although the magic airship was damaged and most of the buildings in the airship had collapsed, it still couldn't hide the advanced nature of the magic airship. It couldn't hide the advanced technology of the goblins. Speaking of which, can your Kikai race also make a magic-guided airship like this? Silent Wonder asked Zayubalas. Answer. Through analysis and replication, the Kikai race can complete the creation of the magic airship. Data flowed through Hublitus's eyes as he answered Wuming. In other words, you have no way to innovate on your own? His footsteps didn't stop as he continued walking. The Kikai race will evolve according to the environment of the current era. Hublitus was silent for a moment, then said, I see. I'm interested in the god who created you. Wuming laughed. However, Wuming remembered that the dragon goblin had said that the creators of many races had disappeared. Some were killed by other gods, and some disappeared for unknown reasons. After that, Wuming glanced at Hublitus. If the Kikai race were to exist, did their creator disappear on his own, or was he killed by other gods? Wuming speculated that both outcomes were possible. Firstly, that god had such a powerful race. It was almost impossible for a god to kill that god. However, there was no one to command the Kikai race now. Therefore, Wuming felt that it was very likely that the god had disappeared on his own for unknown reasons. Secondly, the Mekai species had the ability to copy and reflect the enemy's attacks, which could be called a bug. The god who created them was likely to be attacked by the other gods. If the god was unscrupulous, the god who created them might still be killed by the other gods. That was why Wuming felt that both were possible. By the way, can you tell me who the god who created you was? Wuming asked. Although it involved some intelligence issues, it was still unknown whether he could get Hublitus to speak. What if he succeeded? According to the records in the database, the god who created us Kikai species is called Sail Tower. He disappeared 10,000 years ago. After hearing Wuming ask about the god who created him, Zayubaras was silent for a moment before explaining to Wuming. Wuming looked at Hubric in surprise. Wuming didn't expect Hubric to speak. After all, this was a so-called secret. After that, Hubric really didn't say anything else. So Hubric only told me the name of the god who created them. He didn't expect to get any information anyway, so it didn't make a difference. At that moment, the magic airship started shaking violently. Wuming and Hubric stopped. Has that thing made a move? Wuming spread his magic power, and sensed the direction of the three humans. They were a species that was quickly approaching them. Demon spawn. After confirming that the enemy was just an ordinary demon, Wuming began to move in the direction of the three humans. Let's go, Hubric. The timeline was pushed forward by a few minutes. After the three humans entered here, they moved forward carefully and seriously. While investigating the surrounding passageways, a rather young man among the three of them shouted excitedly, Rick, Ivan, come and see. The young man, Oray, discovered something and became excited. However, the leader, Rick and Uncle Ivan, looked at Oray seriously and gestured to him to be quiet. Oray only then reacted. In this era, making a scene meant death. Even the humans in their temporary base didn't dare to go out much for fear of attracting disaster. However, since it was something that could make Oray excited, it must be something good. Then the three followed Oray to a room. A world map drawn by the goblins. And it's the latest version. Rick was also a little excited, but as a qualified leader, he wouldn't lose his cool. That's right, even the division of the forces of each race is clearly marked. This time we've picked up a big fish. Ivan was also happy. Ivan, Oray, modify our map according to the goblin's map. Be quick. Rick ordered. Yes. Pledge to the will. Just like the slogan of Y, after Ivan and Oray finished speaking, the two of them took out a map and a series of tools from their backpacks, such as a quill and a right-angle board, and began to modify the map. Rick, on the other hand, went to a device and began to study it. A communication device for the goblins. Rick looked at the lines of text that flowed out of the device that looked like a telescope and said calmly. For Rick, it was necessary to learn the language of other races. Therefore, Rick began to decipher this information. How much more are they going to destroy this planet? Rick said softly with anger and sadness. It seemed that Rick saw a shocking secret. At this moment, the entire magic airship began to shake. Rumble. Leave quickly. Rick immediately ordered. This situation meant that something was about to attack. Ivan stepped out of the room first. Rick looked at Oray, who wanted to take the goblin's device away, and said with a frown, "Don't bother with the devices that need to be activated by the elves." But Oray was unwilling to give up. Really, it was not easy to find valuable information, and he was unwilling to be unable to take it away. "Just say it if you want to die." Rick suddenly became ruthless. Oray gritted his teeth and gave up on the goblin's device, and followed Rick out of the room. Because the structure of this magic airship extended in all directions, even if most of it was destroyed, the interior was still relatively chaotic. Only people like Wuming and Hubrick could not get lost on their first try. Rick and the other two probably used some method to record the route when they came in. If they wandered in here, it was likely that they would be killed by the hidden dangers. Right now, the three of them were hiding in a cavern that had collapsed. They adjusted their breathing and tried their best not to be detected by the demons. The three of them had already realized that the enemy this time was the demons. The hearts of the three of them fell silent. Demons were existences that treated humans as food. The feeling of watching one's friends and family being eaten by demons with one's own eyes was simply maddening. But even so, "Ivan, I order you to die here." Rick tried to be as cold as possible, but he still could not hide the sorrow in his words. It was already a routine. Among those who went out to collect information, once they encountered a similar danger, one of them must be sacrificed to help the others escape. And as the leader, Rick naturally could not be sacrificed. Oray was still of the younger generation, so Ivan, who already had a family and children, was the best choice. In an era where humans could not survive, once it was time to sacrifice, it would always be the older person who took this step. "Take care of my daughter." Although he was ordered to die, Ivan still maintained a smile, because his death was for his two compatriots to live. He died without regrets. Ivan, Oray, who did not go out to collect information, said somewhat unwillingly. But he also knew that in this situation, only Ivan's death was the most beneficial. But in the end, Oray still closed his mouth, clenched his teeth, and looked at Ivan with grief and indignation. Uncle Ivan smiled at the two, and then rushed out. "Demons! Come! Your food is here!" Ivan shouted, and ran toward the raw material room of the magic airship. From the beginning, they had already set the retreat route, including the route of the sacrifice. Ivan was ready to detonate the raw material room, and die together with the demons. The tentacle-like demons did not know, and quickly wriggled in the gaps of the magic airship, crawling toward Ivan. And just as Ivan took out the detonation device, and Rick and Oray were about to take the opportunity to leave, a voice came. "What I hate the most is tentacles and mucus." Chapter 418. As soon as Wuming finished speaking, the demon's tentacles stopped as if it was stunned. Then, a blue transparent substance began to appear on the body of the giant demon. It was ice. In just a second, the demonic seed turned into a lifelike ice sculpture. This made Ivan, who was about to self-destruct, stunned as he stared blankly at the demon that was already very close to him. At such a close distance, Ivan could even feel the cold air coming from the ice sculpture. What's going on?" Ivan asked in a trembling voice. "Ivan, get out of there. There are people of other races here." At this time, Riker shouted at Ivan and then ran toward Ivan with Oray. Ivan was reminded and immediately calmed down as he hurried to meet up with Riker and Oray. The three of them were in a state of alert as they looked around. The reason why Riker and Oray came back was because of the strength of the enemy. The enemy was a powerhouse who could instantly freeze the demon, so escaping was impossible. Therefore, Riker and Oray chose to meet up with Ivan. "Riker, what do we do now?" Oray gulped and asked nervously. "Don't act rashly for now. Since the other party didn't choose to attack us but chose to attack the demon, it means that they are not hostile to us," Leader Riker calmly analyzed. Although that was what he said, Riker's hand was still on his dagger. After all, although the other party could be said to be Ivan's savior, but in this era, there were also people who first gave people hope and then gave people despair, so they must not be careless. Because in this era, carelessness meant death. It's all my fault, Rick. If I could have detonated it earlier, maybe you could have taken the opportunity to escape. Ivan said to Rick with some self-blame, still keeping his vigilant eyes on the surroundings. Don't say that, Ivan. Even if you detonated the material room and bought us time, don't forget that the other party can instantly freeze a demon of this size. If they really wanted to kill us, I don't think we could outrun such a powerhouse. Riker said calmly as he continued to look around vigilantly. That's true, Ivan. Maybe the other party actually wants to save you so that we can leave safely. That way you can meet Nana. O'Ray's face was filled with joy and hope as he pretended to be calm and said to Ivan. By the way, Nong Na was Ivan's daughter. Wu Ming, who was hiding in the dark, was amused. He had to admit that a naive human like O'Ray could actually survive in this era. Even Wu Ming, after knowing the current information of this world, had already realized that this was a race war. Wu Ming still understood the principle that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Not to mention, humans were a race that was ignored by other powerful races. O'Ray was truly naive to say such a thing. Don't be silly, O'Ray. Riker scolded. The other party didn't do anything to us because we're still useful. No one would save us humans. You know that, right? Rick's words shamed O'Ray to the core. O'Ray understood that, but he still hoped that someone would come to save them. But Riker, didn't you think the same before? A god that can create humans. O'Ray's voice became softer and softer until he stopped talking. Humans don't have a god. We humans have to rely on ourselves. Riker glanced at O'Ray and continued to look around vigilantly. Riker, that person hasn't appeared yet. What's going on? Ivan voiced out his confusion. That's right. Ever since the demon was frozen, Riker, O'Ray, and Ivan had met up and looked around vigilantly. Even now, that person still hadn't appeared. Now that you mention it, it seems that's true. O'Ray also realized that something was wrong after hearing Ivan's words. Riker naturally noticed the problem, but Riker thought that the other party was just putting on airs and putting on a show, so he didn't care. However, it had been so long, and the other party still hadn't appeared. That wasn't right. Did he leave? This thought popped up in O'Ray and Ivan's minds. As the leader, Riker naturally understood what the two of them were thinking, so Riker, Ivan and O'Ray had the same idea. But, let's wait and see. We can't be careless. Although Riker was confused, he didn't believe that the other party would leave just like that. He continued to be in a stalemate. No race would play with humans so excessively. Other races that saw humans as ants and mice, although there were times when they played with humans, it was impossible for them to take so long. It was the same logic as how a person couldn't play with 3 insects that were smaller than ants for an entire day. No exceptions. Hiding in the dark, Hubrick looked at Wu Ming in confusion. Question. Why don't you go down and meet them? Faced with Hubrick's question, Wu Ming, who was deep in thought, came back to his senses. Why don't I go down and meet them? I was going to meet them, but I've changed my mind now. The reason why Wu Ming said that was because Riker and the others were wary of non-humans. For a long time, the humans in this world had entered an unusually vigilant state because of their desire to survive. Listening to their conversation, it seemed that Riker was a leader-like figure. As a leader, Riker was more vigilant than ordinary humans. To put it simply, it was because humans had been oppressed and hurt for a long time, causing humans to be unusually nervous. As the leader of the entire race, Riker shouldered a heavy burden that others couldn't imagine. Therefore, Riker was more distrustful of other races than others and more vigilant. In that case, if I go up and say, I'm here to help you, it will definitely have the opposite effect, Wu Ming said bluntly. I don't understand. Then what should Nameless do next? Hubrick asked. After thinking for a moment, Wu Ming looked at Riker and the other two with a smile on his face. Since the other party is so vigilant, then I'll be a god and play with them. Hubrick looked at Wu Ming's smile, tilted his head, and data flowed in his eyes. Nameless, my database shows that your current smile is called a bad taste. How? How can that be? Cough cough. You still don't understand the heart. You'll understand the true meaning of this smile after you understand the heart. Yes, that's right. Kubrick nodded as if he understood. Next, it was time to show his acting skills. Chapter 419. Just as Rick was wondering if the other party had really left, a voice came from the void. Nice to meet you, human. This was Wu Ming changing his voice through magic. The entire space felt like it had fallen into a swamp, making the three of them feel quite heavy. The ancient and deep voice came into their ears. The three of them became even more alert. After hearing this voice, O'Ray and Ivan's body shook, which was a sign of excessive nervousness. Rick, on the other hand, was still in shock, looking around cautiously. Let me introduce myself. I am a god, and I don't come from this world. Another world. Ivan and O'Ray looked at each other and exclaimed, Another world. Rick frowned. Regardless of whether the other party was lying or not, one thing was for sure, and that was the other party's information was unknown. Because he didn't know the other party's identity, he couldn't come up with a plan. I can only rely on the conversation to analyze. Rick thought in his heart. That's right, another world. For some reason, I came to this world and met you by accident. The deep voice continued. Then, Lord Unknown God, why do you want to save us? Is it purely out of kindness? Rick asked. However, his question sounded like an interrogative question. Hey, Rick. Ivan and O'Ray looked at Rick nervously. Rick was supposed to be the most cautious one, but now he was the most reckless one. However, Rick did this for a reason. With his super advanced observation skills, Rick was able to glean some information from Wu Ming's words. This was a god who was not easily angered. Ha ha ha, as expected of the leader of the humans. Even if I said that I just wanted to help you, you wouldn't believe me. Wu Ming laughed. Ivan and Ol were stunned, while Rick's lips curled into a smile. That's right, I have a purpose. Wu Ming's words made Ivan and O'Ray's body tense up. After all, even if he was from another world, he was still a god. Leader of the humans, Rick, I want to make a bet with you. Rick frowned when he heard this. What bet? Rick asked bluntly. I'll bet on the possibility of being human. Rick felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His body trembled slightly and his pupils contracted. Possibility. Ivan and O'Ray, on the other hand, looked confused. Then, why are you betting on the possibility of humans with me? Rick asked in a heavy tone. In the world I live in, I am the guardian god who protects humanity. Do you understand? Wu Ming explained. Rick's pupils contracted again and then he smiled. Is it possible for humans? Although Wu Ming was wearing a mask, he could sense that Rick's smile contained a lot of meaning. Sadness, joy, excitement, dissatisfaction. Almost all positive and negative emotions were contained within. How about it? Do you want to bet? The bet is that the winner can order the loser once. Any kind of order. What do you think? Wu Ming continued asking. I'll bet with you. Rick answered Wu Ming with unprecedented enthusiasm. Haha, very good. Leader of the humans, Rick, I look forward to your actions. After that, the heavy pressure on the three disappeared. The god left. Hey Rick. Is it really a good idea to make such a rash decision? Ivan and O'Ray looked at Rick worriedly. Although this unknown god gave off a harmless feeling, they should still be cautious. After all, Rick was their leader. If something were to happen to him, what would they do? Don't worry, I will win. Rick looked at Ivan and O'Ray. Ivan and O'Ray looked into Rick's eyes and were stunned. This pair of eyes contained an unprecedented light, filled with faith and hope. It was as if Rick had become a completely different person. By the way, what is the possibility of being human? O'Ray was completely confused. That guy is surprisingly emotional, Rick said, baffled. Huh. Ivan and O'Ray looked at each other, even more confused. Think about it. That guy is a god from another world who protects the humans, and the humans under his protection live a happy life. But when they come to this world, they find that the humans here are so weak. If it were you, what would you do, O'Ray? Old Rickety asked. If it were me, I would be very unhappy and would want to change the situation. It was like a certain country. The people of that country were living very well in their own country, but one day, they went abroad and found that their countrymen were being targeted by others. Their lives were very miserable. Naturally, their first reaction would be very unhappy. That God is the same. He can't stand the humans being so depraved, so he wants to change the situation. The possibility of being human is the key. Ivan and Oray still didn't quite understand, but well, it's all up to you, Rick. We don't understand this. Ivan looked helpless. That's right, that's right. As long as it's Rick, I believe you can win. Oray looked at Rick like a fanboy. Let's go, Ivan. Oray. Let's go realize our possibility. Oh, then the three of them left. Wuming's Hubrick's figure walked out from the side. I don't understand. The possibility of being human is not recorded in the database. Hubrick thought about this as he listened to the conversation between Wuming and Rick. When you have a heart, you will naturally know. You don't need to think about it. Wuming touched Hubrick's head and said casually. Hubrick nodded as if he didn't fully understand. Then Hubrick asked another question. Question nameless, is it God? Or is it acting? Hubrick tilted his head and looked at Wuming. Ah, you mean that? It's not completely acting. After all, I really did bless the humans and was worshipped as a god by them. Wuming thought of the Uruk people. But compared to being a god, I prefer to be a traveler. The world is too big. It's impossible to finish walking, Wuming said with a smile. God traveler, bless humans. Hubrick muttered the key words. No one knew what he was thinking. That human named Rick is very good. I'm going to give you to him and stay by his side. I believe you will understand the heart. Hubrick nodded again as if he understood. Then, Wuming looked outside. Outside, the elven skeleton continued to deepen. Three figures were moving quickly in a certain direction. The environment continued to deteriorate, but the possibility of being human was being excavated little by little. Do your best, humans. Chapter 420. Rick went back with hope in his heart. Wuming and Hublitus quietly followed behind Rick and the others. What a joke. It was not easy to meet humans. It would be a huge loss if they did not follow them to figure out where the humans gathered. It had to be said that Rick and the others were really cautious. Wuming discovered that the place where he met Rick and the others was very far from their base. This was probably also for survival. If they were targeted by other races and needed to be sacrificed, they would not expose the hiding places of other humans. They came to a cave and watched Rick and the others walk in. Wuming speculated that this might be their base. Find a place to hide. Don't run around. I'll go in and take a look, Wuming instructed Hublitus. Wuming got Hublitus to hide and wait for him. Then Wuming entered the cave in spirit form and followed Rick and the others. Ahem. After all, spirit form was quite practical. Moreover, Wuming's current body was created by himself, so he could naturally add extra small abilities at will. Spirit form, which could only be used by spirits, was easily done by Wuming with the help of the power of the origin and Wuming's understanding of spirit form. After all, the origin was the origin of everything. The reason why he did not add other abilities was that they were not powers that Wuming was familiar with. Adding them was quite troublesome, and even if he added them, he would not be used to them. Moreover, even if those super powerful abilities were added to this body, they would not be much stronger. Even Wuming's original abilities had been weakened, let alone other abilities. Therefore, Wuming only added spirit form to his body, and everything else was the same as his original body. Inside the cave, there was a long tunnel without any light, except for the torches that Rick and the others were holding. The top of the torch was not a flame, but a stone tied to it. This was a stone unique to this world. As long as it came into contact with water, the stone would absorb the water and emit light. It was very practical. The three of them each held a torch as they walked through the seemingly long tunnel. Rick, who was walking at the front of the cave, seemed to have sensed something. He instantly turned his head and looked at the tunnel behind him. What's wrong, Rick? Ivan and Oren, who were following behind Rick, didn't seem to want to answer. Rick took another long look into the dark tunnel. "I'm fine. Let's go." He gradually landed behind Ivan and Oray, looking back from time to time. Gradually, the three of them went further and further away, leaving only the light of the torches. This is really surprising. Is it a sixth sense, or is it just a simple sense of vigilance? Wuming's voice rang out calmly. Wuming was still in his spirit form. Wuming once again cast a large number of concealment spells on himself before he felt at ease and followed Rick. Coming to the end of the tunnel, Wuming heard someone shout out these words excitedly. Wuming passed through the wall. Through his perception and eyes, Wuming saw the place where humans lived. This was a super-wide natural underground cave, but there were also signs of artificial modification. Countless colorful glowing stones decorated this natural karst cave, and in some places there was even land, with some grains that Wuming did not recognize growing on it. All kinds of humans were busy. Some were managing the land with grains, some were managing the terrace fields, and some were collecting water through special means. The houses were built directly on the mountain, making use of the independent space of the karst caves. This was a simple room, and there was even a stable that was used as a means of transportation. The humans lived in an orderly manner, almost like a small society. At the spot where Rick and the other two were, there were people who took away their item backpacks. A rose-haired girl hugged Rick, looking very worried. "Daddy." At this time, a young voice was heard. A purple-haired girl ran towards the three of them, and rushed into the arms of the uncle named Ivan. Oh, no nah, did you listen to your big sister Crone?" Ivan hugged Nana lovingly and asked with a smile. No Na is very obedient to big sister Crone. No Na also knows how to write No Na's name. Look, No Na wrote it herself. Nana said as she picked up the unknown paper in her hand and showed it to Ivan. "Oh haha, as expected of my daughter, you can write your own name. Daddy is proud of you." Ivan smiled from the bottom of his heart and stroked Nana's head. Hee. Nana laughed happily. Seeing this scene, Rick's heart was filled with uneasiness and shame. If it wasn't for the god who came in time, Nana probably wouldn't be able to see her father again. Rick lowered his head in self-blame. "Rick, what happened?" The rose-haired girl frowned as she looked at Rick, who had his head lowered. It seemed like a lot of things happened. "It's okay, Crone." Rick shook his head and looked at Crone with fighting spirit in his eyes. "Really? I told you to call me sister." "Well, forget it. Being able to return safely is better than anything else. Welcome back, Rick." Crone looked at Rick with displeasure at first, then her expression relaxed, and she smiled at Rick. "Yes, I'm back, Crone." Seeing this scene, Wuming nodded with satisfaction. Saving that human named Ivan wasn't in vain. Wuming in spirit form nodded with satisfaction. Then he didn't look at Rick and the others anymore. Instead, he left the place and went outside to meet up with Zayubruk. On the top of a slightly higher mountain nearby, Wuming and Zayubruk looked into the distance. "Hey Zayubruk, I think you should enter the lives of these humans," Wuming said without turning his head. Answer: Zayubruk has been abandoned by the Kakai race. How to deal with him is the power of the current owner of Zayubruk, nameless, Zayubruk said calmly. "Your words are quite ambiguous. I'm not your master. Remember, no one can be the master of others, not even you, the Kakai race, because you are a race that is about to have a heart." Understand. Can't. Data flowed in Zayubruk's eyes as he stuttered this sentence. "Well, you won't understand even if I tell you now. When you have a heart, you will understand without a teacher." Wuming smiled as he stroked Zayubruk's head. Wuming firmly believed that after living with humans for a period of time, and with Wuming's guidance, Zayubruk would be able to understand a heart and have feelings. Because letting machines have feelings was one of the possibilities for humans. Chapter 421. Because of his bet with Wuming, after a few days, Rick didn't continue to stay in the base. Instead, he chose to continue collecting information. Perhaps because he didn't want anyone else to die, Rick didn't bring anyone else with him this time. Instead, he rode a horse-like means of transportation raised by humans, and took the first step to prove the possibility of humans. Wuming and Hubletus naturally followed after seeing Rick leave. "This is a great opportunity to send you into human life through Rick," Wuming said. Not only that, but Wuming was also curious about where Rick was going next. In this era where one could die if they weren't careful, it was impossible for humans like Rick to go out without prepared information. Flying in the sky, Wuming looked at the fully armed Rick with his superhuman vision, as well as the bags of food and water hanging from the beasts that functioned like horses. He easily deduced that Rick was going somewhere far away, a means of transportation for long-distance travel, and at least 5 days of dry food and water. It didn't look like he was going for a casual stroll. Rick stopped moving forward and looked behind him vigilantly, making a puzzled sound. But it was obvious that he didn't find anything, so Rick continued on his way. "He's quite vigilant," Wuming said while flying in the sky and relying on the concealment technique. Wuming and Hubletus relied on the concealment technique to fly in the sky from the beginning. Not to mention Rick, even other races might not be able to discover Wuming and Hubletus who were concealed by Wuming's technique. It seemed that in this era, not being vigilant would really lead to death. This time, Wuming was extra careful. He and Hubletus flew at a higher altitude and followed behind Rick. After following Rick for almost half a day, Rick finally stopped changing his route and began to accelerate towards a certain place at full speed. Because the Earth had become the battlefield of various races, Rick kept changing his route. Perhaps it was because Rick had never been to his destination before, so he kept looking for the best route and marking it on the map. Wuming asked Zayubrick as he watched Rick move in this direction at the fastest speed possible. "Is there anything noteworthy in this direction?" Wuming asked out of curiosity. After all, Rick didn't seem to know how to change directions. Data flowed through Hubrick's yellow eyes, which were like warning lines, before he opened his mouth to answer Wuming. Answer: Zayubrick's database shows that ahead is the abandoned old capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. Oh, Wuming was intrigued. According to the intel, the Forest Elves and Goblins were sworn enemies, and Rick's destination this time was likely to be the former capital of the Forest Elves. In addition, Rick had found some good intel from the Goblins' crash magic airship, so Wuming felt that Rick's target was the former capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. As the saying goes, the one who knows you best is your enemy, so it was normal to have information about your sworn enemy. Therefore, Wuming wasn't surprised that Rick had found information about the Forest Elves from the Goblins' crashed magic airship. "I'm slightly interested in that place." Wuming's lips curled up. After all, even if it was an abandoned old capital, it was still the glory of the Forest Elves. It was like a gorgeous ruin that hid secrets. "Let's go take a look in advance, Zayubrick. What do you think?" Wuming asked Zayubrick. Answer: Zayubrick doesn't care. "Everything will be decided by John Doe," Zayubrick said calmly. "That won't do, Zayubrick. You have to learn how to think and ask questions. It's because humans know how to think that they can survive the war with other races. This is the prerequisite for you to obtain a heart, Zayubrick," Wuming said to Zayubrick as he shook his head calmly. After Zayubrick heard Wuming's words, the data in his eyes flowed again. After a few seconds, Zayubrick nodded. "Understood, Zayubrick. I understand." Zayubrick nodded. "Then, what do you think about us going to take a look first?" Wuming repeated his question. "I agree. Zayubrick isn't interested in the former capital of the Forest Elves. However, since John Doe wants to go, Zayubrick will accompany him." Zayubrick looked into Wuming's eyes and said seriously. Although Zayubrick seemed to be a little dependent on Wuming felt that Zayubrick's current state was already very good. "Then let's go take a look first. Please lead the way for me." Wuming looked at Zayubrick with a smile. Zayubrick looked at Wuming's smile and nodded. Then 2 meteors streaked across the sky. Because of the increase in altitude, Rick didn't notice that something was wrong and continued to move forward at full speed. However, even if Rick was riding a vehicle, it was still too slow for Wuming and Zayubrick. About 10 seconds later, Wuming saw a dilapidated city. Wuming and Zayubrick landed in front of the old capital of the Forest Elves, Merlrin, and walked in through the gap. It was attacked, right? No wonder it was abandoned. Wuming looked at the traces of destruction inside Merlrin. It was obviously not the power of nature, but man-made. Answer. According to the records in the database, this place was attacked by the skywing species, Zayubrek said calmly as he followed behind Wuming. Skywing species? No wonder it was destroyed like this, Wuming said knowingly. It could be said that the buildings in Merwin were basically destroyed, and there was no complete building at all. I'm afraid Rick will be very disappointed if he comes. After all, there was no doubt that Rick's purpose was to search for information, and it was unlikely that there would be any information in Merwin that had been destroyed, unless the forest elves used magic to protect the information. Then Wuming saw a complete sea of flowers filled with elves. There was no doubt that this place was protected by the forest elves' magic. There really is a place protected by magic. Wuming and Zayubrek walked over. Places protected by magic are usually the forest elves' treasure troves, laboratories, and other valuable places. Zayubrek explained to Wuming as he followed Wuming to the center of the flower bed. Are you saying that we've caught a big fish? Wuming's lips curled into a smile. Then, Wuming used magic to open the door on the floor. Want to take a look together, Zayubrek? The reason why Wuming sent an invitation to Hubrek was because there might be a trap below, which represented danger. Agreed. Zayubrek will work with John Doe. Then Wuming and Zayubrek walked down the exposed stairs and went underground. The laboratory-like scene entered Wuming's eyes. Chapter 422. Wuming saw a laboratory-like scene full of forest elves technology. There was a huge mainframe that looked like a human brain wrapped in purple glowing vines, as well as several giant pillars engraved with a large number of flashing purple tactics. There was also a screen-like display on the ground with a large number of forest elves' words reflected on it. The entire space was immersed in purple. Hint, this is likely to be the development site of the forest elves' new weapons, Hubrek said to Wuming as he looked at the giant pillar engraved with mysterious runes. Can't Hubrek understand these runes? Wuming asked. The runes of Canas are not in Hubrek's database. Hubrek shook his head. In this regard, Wuming did not show any disappointment. Wuming had almost guessed it. Walking forward and coming to the screen on the ground, Wuming infused it with magic power. The entire room lit up, and all the instruments began to operate. Seeing such a scene, Hubrek was puzzled. Puzzled? Why can John Doe reactivate the instruments powered by elves? Hubrek, who followed Wuming, now knew that Wuming, who came from another world, did not have any elves in his body. Logically speaking, he should not be able to use the instruments of this world. Wuming smiled slightly at Hubrek's question. It's considered my own ability. In the beginning, after Wuming sensed that there was no magic power in this world, Wuming was indeed unable to use magic and spells that required magic power. However, the energy elves of this world were also products of the Big Root. Therefore, Wuming, who was of the same origin as the Big Root, could also be said to have the ability to use elves. It was not difficult for Wuming to use the elves floating in the atmosphere, but it was a little troublesome. After that, after Wuming adapted to the power system of this world, and found that he could act as a sprite of this world through the magic power in his body, Wuming began to use the almost infinite magic power in his body. Well, this body didn't have unlimited mana. Although this body was created based on Wuming's original body, it couldn't imitate the characteristics of the root dragon. However, it had enough mana. To put it simply, the energy I possess can be of use to this world. It's that simple. Wuming stopped looking at Hubrek, who was nodding his head like he didn't understand. He started to study the host. On the large screen, countless words and a large number of unknown formulas appeared. Logically speaking, Wuming shouldn't be able to understand them, but now, Wuming was concentrating on reading. Wuming knew that this world was different from the world he was familiar with. Therefore, after getting familiar with Hubrek, Wuming asked Hubrek to teach Wuming the various languages of this world. Hubrek, who had a database, naturally knew most of the languages. In addition, Hubrek was now Wuming's main focus, so Hubrek easily taught Wuming all the languages he could teach. Wuming didn't disappoint Hubrek's teaching and quickly learned most of it. Therefore, Wu-Ming could still understand the languages of ordinary races, such as the language of the forest elves on the screen. The Zeroth Void Blessing Theory Verification Experimental Furnace. Wu-Ming read out the name of the experiment. Wu-Ming couldn't even understand the name of the experiment personnel, let alone the name of the experiment. Ciphertext? Wu-Ming could more or less guess why he couldn't understand it. After all, it was a new weapon experiment, so the experiment content should naturally use ciphertext. However, deciphering these ciphertexts was only a matter of time for the Kakai race Hubric. Hubric, come and help me. After hearing the call, Hubric, who was still looking at the mysterious giant pillar, walked toward Wu-Ming. And as if Hubric's arrival had triggered some mechanism, the purple vine wrapped around the Cortex Prime instantly glowed, and countless light swords appeared out of thin air. A trap? A defensive tactic? Wu-Ming looked at the light swords that were already flying toward the two of them. Wu-Ming could sense that there were a large number of elves in these light swords, and they were likely to explode if they hit the target. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day, sinners shall be punished. Shatter their backs, dig out their tendons, bones, hair, and brains, and trample on their blood and mud. If I am one who cannot be approached by darkness, I will obey the words of the Lord and destroy thee. After reciting the words, a purplish-black fog appeared around Wu-Ming's body. Wu-Ming's heart needle pointed in the direction of 5 o'clock, and the stone plate that represented annihilation lit up. The purplish-black fog instantly attacked the light swords, and in an instant, it was as if the purplish-black fog had devoured them. These light swords didn't even make a sound, let alone explode. Annihilation theoretically could devour and destroy everything, as long as Wu-Ming knew how to use it. Immediately after, Wu-Ming once again controlled the purplish-black fog to suddenly attack Hubric. Hubric looked at Wu-Ming in confusion, but he didn't resist. Instantly, the Cortex Prime emitted light and touched the purplish-black fog that enveloped Hubric, but the purplish-black fog instantly eroded the light. As expected, the experimental furnace has been activated, Wu-Ming said knowingly. Wu-Ming stopped injecting magic power into the apparatus, and immediately after, the brain-like experimental furnace dimmed as if it had run out of energy. This was like a laptop. After taking advantage of the situation for a long time, the computer ran out of battery. Even if it was connected to a power source, if the power was immediately cut off, the computer would quickly run out of power. Are you okay, Hubric? Wu-Ming removed the mist of annihilation and asked Hubric. Hubric shook his head. The reason Wu-Ming had enveloped Hubric with the mist of annihilation was that Wu-Ming had deduced that Hubric was likely to be attacked. This was the laboratory, and it was Hubric who had activated those defensive spell light swords when he approached, so Wu-Ming believed that Hubric would definitely be attacked. Thus, he used the mist of annihilation to envelop Hubric. Sure enough, although the light just swept past Wu-Ming, it seemed to only target Hubric. If one were to talk about the biggest difference between Wu-Ming and Zhubric, it would be the energy in their bodies. Wu-Ming's energy was magic power, while Hubric's energy was elven, so Wu-Ming guessed that this weapon was likely to be in existence that targeted elves as a mid-tier force. I've almost guessed the principle of this thing, but to fully understand it, I still need your decryption. Wu-Ming stroked his chin and looked at the experimental furnace. Looking at the time, Rick should be here soon. I'll go meet him. You can stay here and help with the analysis. There's no danger anymore, Wu-Ming said to Hubric. If it was just one person, Wu-Ming could show himself. After all, he couldn't keep sending messages through the void. Understood, Hubric replied. Right. Wu-Ming, who was walking toward the entrance, turned his head and looked at Hubric. I was protecting you just now. This is also a manifestation of the heart. After that, Wu-Ming left the room, leaving behind Hubric, whose eyes were constantly revolving with data. Protect the power of the heart. Chapter 423. Wu-Ming left Hubric in the lab after confirming that there was no longer any danger. He then went out of the underground lab and arrived at the entrance of Melon City. As expected, Wu-Ming found Rick already there. Rick found a safe place to hide his mount, and then began to explore the old city. Although it was called an exploration, in reality, the houses here had basically collapsed. Rick had come this time hoping for a fluke. Even if it was an abandoned old city, it was still the old city of the forest elves. It was unlikely that they would leave anything behind. At this time, Rick also discovered that these places were destroyed by humans. This kind of destructive power doesn't seem like it's from the goblins. Skywings, Rick judged. It had to be said that as the leader of the humans, Rick had mastered a lot of abilities. Strong vigilance, extremely calm mentality, disguise, deceit, numbing oneself, and the cruelty of sacrificing the small to save the big, as well as the characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and abilities of each race. Although it was not comprehensive, Rick had collected most of it. Rick did not have any extraordinary talents or abilities, but as a leader who led the other humans to live in this annoying era, these were all necessary. If he did not master these, he would not be able to survive. Simply put, he was forced. No one was willing to be born to deceive and suspect others, and Rick was the same. And the reason why Wu Ming knew this was because Wu Ming had seen it the last time they met. From the beginning, when Rick, Ivan, and Wu Ming came on the Goblin's fallen magic airship to saving Ivan, and leaving after talking to the three of them, Rick's performance as the leader was seen by Wu Ming. Wu Ming could only say that Rick was not the best leader, but Rick was the most suitable leader to lead the other humans in this era. After Rick checked the buildings that were not intact, he quickly searched for any strange places. Soon, he discovered the Sea of Flowers and the underground passage that had been opened. Someone has been here. Could it be the forest elves? Rick was shocked. After all, under such circumstances, it was unlikely. No, it was impossible for humans to come here. Compared to other races, it was very likely that the forest elves would return to retrieve the materials that they did not manage to take away in time. Don't worry, there are no forest elite species coming. Suddenly, a young man's voice was heard. Rick immediately pulled out the dagger at his waist and turned towards the source of the sound. Rick saw a man wearing a black cloak with a hood. The fat cloak covered the man's entire body, and his hands were hidden in the cloak. Even his body was not exposed. Rick could only vaguely see the man's heels at the bottom of the cloak that was about to touch the ground. The wide hood basically covered the person's face. His hair, eyes, nose, and other body parts could not be seen. The only things that could be seen were his mouth, chin, and the voice just now. It was impossible to tell what race he was from. However, Rick's attire was similar to his opponent's. He wore a hooded cloak that covered half of his body, a pair of thick goggles that covered his eyes, and a scarf-like cloth that covered his mouth. Only his calves and hands were exposed, and Rick held a dagger that shone with a cold light in his hand. Who are you? Rick's previous panic seemed to be fake. He instantly adjusted himself and coldly asked the person who had come. Rick did not notice the man's arrival. If the man did not speak, Rick would not even know that there was someone behind him. To be more specific, the man in front of Rick gave him a sense of illusion. If he did not see him with his eyes, it was as if the man did not exist. There was no breath at all. The man was, of course, Wu Ming, who cast a lot of shielding magic on himself. There was no breath because of the effect of magic. Why don't you recognize me? Then how about this? When Wu Ming said the last three words, he used magic to change his voice. His voice immediately became the voice that Rick was familiar with. He had seen him a few days ago. The god from the other world. Rick was shocked at first, but then he calmed down and put the dagger back into the scabbard at his waist. Why? Are you not afraid that I will hurt you? Wu Ming said to Rick with his original voice. There is no need for that. According to the rules of this world, you are a type of god. Even the weakest type of god is not something that a mere human can deal with. Rick continued after a pause. Moreover, even if you are a member of any other race, you are stronger than humans in terms of fighting. If you want to kill me, I will not be able to stop you. What Rick meant was that no matter who the man was, he could not defeat or defend against his attacks. Moreover, the man would not kill him, so there was no need for him to defend himself. Moreover, you actually want to help humans, Lord God from the other world. Rick took off the blindfold, the cloth that acted as a mask, and the hood, and looked at Wu Ming. Oh, why do you think so? Is it because I said that I am a god that protects humans in my world? Wu Ming asked. However, Rick shook his head without hesitation. Of course not. I am not stupid enough to believe the words of an unknown person. Rick showed a proud expression. However, you still made a bet with me, who is unknown and has insufficient information. Wu Ming's words were like a sharp knife that pierced Rick's heart. Rick stood there awkwardly. I promised you to protect Ivan and Ole. It was an expedient measure, ahaha. Rick touched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. However, there is no reason to reject a bet between men. Am I right, Lord God? But in an instant, Rick regained his cold expression. In fact, even if Rick did not say it, Wu Ming understood. For someone like Rick, how could he not understand the meaning of Wu Ming's words? Whether it was Wu Ming saving Ivan, or the conversation with Rick, Rick felt the goodwill of Wu Ming. However, as Rick said, how could he easily believe the words of an unknown person? Let's assume that if Wu Ming was planning to deceive Rick and others, then as long as they followed Wu Ming's intentions, they would be fine. And if Rick did not bet with Wu Ming, then it was likely that Wu Ming, who wanted to deceive Rick and others, would be angry. If he could not achieve his goal, these humans would be useless. Then Wu Ming, an unknown person, would likely have this idea to directly eliminate Rick and others. Therefore, Rick chose to bet with him. As if knowing that Wu Ming already knew his thoughts, Riker went on to say, in fact, there is a more important reason why I bet with you. And that is the content of the bet, the possibility of humans. Chapter 424. The possibility of humans was an extremely vague statement. The definition of possibility referred to the probability of something happening. It was a quantitative indicator that predicted the development of something. It was an objective proof, not a subjective proof. But the possibility of humans, which aspect did it refer to, or all of them? One had to know that the more confusing the contents of the bet, the higher the chance of winning. The question of the possibility of humans had many meanings, but both Wu Ming and Rick had the same idea. You want to bet on the future of humans, right, Lord God? Rick stared at Wu Ming. I don't know if you didn't want to hide it or purposely revealed it, but your intentions are too obvious. It's so obvious that even I want to suspect you. Rick smiled as if he was talking to an old friend that he hadn't seen in years. But you still made the bet with me, didn't you? Wu Ming said directly. Ah, you're right. Rick closed his eyes. No matter how suspicious Wu Ming was, no matter how dangerous Wu Ming was, no matter how numb Rick was, no matter how scared Rick was, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Humans that are not valued, humans that are ignored by other races, humans without power. I really want to see their expressions of anger after their plans are ruined by humans. Ha ha ha, Rick seemed to have thought of something happy as he laughed happily. Rick didn't know how to end this war, and he didn't have the power to end this war. But collecting information and waiting for an opportunity to come was the way of the weak. And Wu Ming was one of the opportunities. Because of Wu Ming's bet, Rick woke up from his numbness of let humans live. Just because he was weak he couldn't interfere with the strong? Stop joking. Even if I'm weak, I want to prove to you the possibility of humans. Rick stopped laughing and looked at Wu Ming with fighting spirit. Clap clap clap. Wu Ming clapped his hands. You've really impressed me, Rick. Seeing that the leader of humans had such fighting spirit, Wu Ming felt that there was hope to change the world. Then let me tell you how to end this war. Wu Ming took off his hood and looked at him. Now humans had grasped the future. Because the god spirits were not satisfied with being on the same level as other gods, the gods began to fight with other gods. Countless races created by the gods also began to fight with the gods. The Elven Corridor had answered the wishes of the gods to make this planet the place where they were born. Thus, something called the Celestial Cup appeared. Star Cup? Rick asked doubtfully. Rick and Wu Ming walked down the stairs of the underground laboratory. Wu Ming explained the story. Ah, that's right. It's the Star Cup. Wu Ming narrowed his eyes and continued to explain. Only when the gods of this planet decided on the strongest person would the Star Cup appear from the Elven Corridor underground. The strongest person who obtained the Star Cup would become the only god. In other words, these thousands of years of war were actually because of the selfish desires of the gods. Rick fell silent. Because of the selfish desires of the strong, human families were destroyed. They were not valued and were trampled on. They were even treated as food, test subjects, and laborers. I don't think I'll forgive those people. Rick shouted slightly crazily. He hammered the steel wall beside him with one hand. Traces of blood flowed from Rick's hand that he did not remove from the wall. Wuming cast a few healing Lune runes and Rick's hand was healed. This is the law of the jungle. The strong decide everything, and the weak can only accept it, Wuming said calmly. And often, the weak that the strong do not pay attention to will be killed. There were countless examples of the weak defeating the strong. Therefore, Wuming would not underestimate anyone. Even if he looked down on them, he would take them seriously in his heart. By the way, aren't you afraid that I'll think that you want to use us humans to help you obtain the Star Cup by telling me all this? Rick looked at Wuming. However, Wuming just shook his head calmly. There's no need for that, Wuming said calmly. Firstly, I'm a god from another world. Whether I can use the Star Cup of this world, or whether I have the right to obtain it is still unknown. Secondly, I'm very strong, Wuming said as he looked into Rick's eyes. Perhaps you might think that I'm a little arrogant, but according to the information I've obtained, in this world, in terms of combat power, only the creator of the Skywing race, Arthas, who is known as the god of war, can fight me. Wuming's words shocked Rick. Rick had some understanding of Arthas. The god who created the Skywing race was said to have the strongest power among all the gods. He was the strongest god of war who had killed other gods with the god-slaying weapon he created. Hey, are you for real? Are you that strong? Rick looked at Wuming with an extremely shocked gaze. Although Rick also knew that Wuming was not weak and was very likely a powerful god, he could not help but be shocked that Wuming could fight with Arthas, the creator of the god-slaying weapon. Then I'm really sorry. I'm that strong. Wuming half-jokingly shrugged helplessly, and continued to walk down the stairs to the basement. The reason why Wuming said that was because of Wuming's speculation. Back then, Wuming had asked the dragon spirit what rank it was in this world. The dragon spirit half-weakly said that it was almost on par with the strongest god, Arthas. Of course, Wuming did not easily believe the one-sided words of the dragon spirit. After that, Wuming asked for some other information, such as the strength of the dragon spirit and the strength of the Kakai race. After becoming familiar with Hubletus, Wuming also asked Hubletus about it. The database shows that the dragon spirit doesn't lie. They are a race that purely respects the strong. This was Hubletus's original words. Speaking of which, Hubletus also told Wuming some information about the dragon spirit. It could use its past and future power in the present, manipulate time and space, and transfer injuries to the past or future. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to deal with. The dragon spirit whose bones were broken by Wuming's punch was defeated because it underestimated the enemy and fought head-on with Wuming's giant incarnation. The reason why the dragon spirit did not transfer its injuries to the past or future was actually because of the law of the jungle. However, Wuming always felt that the other party was afraid that he would punch him again, so he gave in. Thinking about it, if the dragon spirit seed got up again, with the situation at that time, Wuming was likely to give the dragon spirit seed another punch. Not everyone could block a phoenix and a giant. In short, Wuming inferred from the information that only Arthas could match him. Let's not talk about this for now. We found something good down here. Let's take a look together. With that, Wuming walked away. You guys. Rick muttered this word. Does he have companions? Rick shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He followed Wuming's footsteps and came to the laboratory. Chapter 425. This is. Riker looked at the scene in the underground laboratory and said in shock. It wasn't that Riker was excited when he saw the scene in the underground laboratory, but because of the current state of Zayubarak. As everyone knew, Zayubarak was a Mechakai species and could continuously evolve. The Mechakai species evolved from the 5 small square boxes. And now Zayuberik's appearance just happened to prove the theory of evolution. Zayuberik's petite body floated in the spacious laboratory. Countless cable-like data lines appeared from the body behind Zayuberik's hair, connecting to the brain-like mainframe in the laboratory. Several large screens appeared in front of Zayuberik. Data flowed on them, all of which were data that Wuming and Riker couldn't understand. There was no doubt that Zayuberik was analyzing the content of the Zeroth protection of the void. These cables and other things were actually evolved. According to what Zayuberik told Wuming, if Zayuberik was completely liberated, he could rely on himself to form a high-tech attack spaceship like a battleship. According to Zayuberik, those were all evolved. Although Wuming was very curious about how Zayuberik's body contained so many things, he could almost guess that it was nothing more than an independent space like Wuming's golden ripples. Kikai species. What's going on? Riker looked at Wuming in confusion. It wasn't that Riker suspected that this was Wuming's conspiracy or anything else, but he was suspicious of the Kikai species that had appeared at the moment. After all, the Kikai species all acted in groups, and their neural networks were all connected to each other. It felt awkward as if everyone shared the same brain. However, it was precisely because of this that making an enemy of a Kikai species was making an enemy of an entire race of Kikai species, because their neural networks were all connected. This was also why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. In addition to the other party's replication power, this was also the reason why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. If you accidentally provoked a Mekai seed, countless Mekai seeds would immediately come looking for you. They didn't care about anything else. If you provoked them, they would retaliate. They would attack you without a second thought. Although a single Kikai species was not considered strong, this kind of species that was particularly united and acted in groups were the most difficult to deal with. Rick's mind began to wander after seeing the Mecha Kai seed. Don't worry. It's not what you think, Wuming said. Naturally, he could tell what Rick was thinking. Fear was written all over his face. Hubletus is a Kikai species that I captured. After I captured it, the mainframe that it was connected to cut off its connection with Hubletus and issued a self-destruct mission, but I stopped it. So there are no other species around this abandoned city except for the three of us. It had to be said that the Kikai race was a very rational race. They would not hesitate to give up when it was time to give up. When the captured party received the order to self-destruct, they would self-destruct. They were so rational that it was scary. However, I really can't compliment a Kikai species that was captured by you and can still listen to you. Did you use some kind of magic or something? No one would believe that a highly rational and team-oriented Kikai species would be captured by someone else. However, this was the truth. Kikai species are also creatures. As long as they can communicate and have self-awareness, it's not difficult to get along with them. Wuming said to Rick as he looked at Hubletus, who was floating in the air. Actually, Wuming had other reasons for being able to get Hubletus to use his words so smoothly. Wuming felt that Hubletus might have started thinking long ago and had a hazy feeling about the heart in his heart. After that, Wuming added fuel to the fire, and Hubletus and Wuming acted together. Wuming believed that even without his arrival and without Wuming's guidance to Hubletus, Hubletus could still obtain the heart through his own release. Wuming had such a premonition. After that, Wuming and Rick did not disturb Hubletus's analysis of the data. They just waited quietly and chatted with each other. Wuming told Rick the story of how he waited for him when he was a Hyenryong in the Uruk. The fact that humans were the first species and could use magic, especially peace, deeply attracted Rick. Your world is really interesting. If it's possible, I really want to go to the Uruk you mentioned to have a look. I still don't know what to hand over. Rick smiled awkwardly. Only now did Rick realize that he did not know Wuming's name. In their previous communication, Rick had directly called Wuming Lord God. My name? Lord God passing by, you can just call me nameless. As a god who doesn't belong to this world, there's no need to remember it. Wuming gave a discount and laughed it off. Well, forget it. I'll continue to call you Lord God, Rick said embarrassedly. Rick also saw that Wuming did not want to say his name. Since the other party did not want to tell him, then he would not ask. At this moment, Habilitus's state changed. Habilitus, who was floating in the air, opened his yellow eyes that were like warning lines. At the same time, Habilitus put away all the cables connected to the laboratory's mainframe. Reporting nameless, I have analyzed the information of the Zeroth protection of the void. Habilitus landed in front of Wuming and said lightly, Zeroth protection of the void? This made Rick puzzled. He did not understand the meaning of this term at all. This is what I want to tell you, Rick. Wuming looked deeply at Rick. A moment later, Habilitus projected the information of the Zeroth protection of the void on the wall. This information, which was extremely precious to other foot therapists, was all exposed to Wuming and Rick. The Zeroth protection of the void was a new weapon tactic completed by other forest elves with the tactic power provided by the creator of the forest elves, forest god Canis. It was a weapon specifically targeted at Arthu and his kin, the Skywing species. However, although it was a weapon targeted at the Skywing species and Arthu, it was not that it could not be used against other races. The principle was simply to let the elves in the fantasy breed's body, which was a high-level life form, self-destruct, allowing them to erupt with tremendous power to deal great damage to the enemy. The various races were not equal. In terms of the elves' adaptability, they were divided into life form and living form. Powerful races such as god breeds, fantasy breeds, dragon elves, giant breeds, and skywing species were called life form, while the other races were called living form. In fact, to put it simply, the life form race was a powerful race with different natures from the living form race, while the living form race was a race weaker than the life form race. This is actually a weapon targeted at Arthu? Rick said in slight shock. Chapter 426. Through the self-destruction of a fantasy breed sprite, it can be used to attack Arthu and his Skywing breeds. Its power is enough to destroy the divine marrow of a god. It's practically a weapon of the same nature as the gnome breed's marrow explosion. Rick said seriously. It was worth mentioning that the marrow explosion was information that Rick had found from the gnome's crashed magic airship. The abandoned city of the forest elves was also found from the same magic airship. The Zeroth ward of the void that Zayubrik had analyzed clearly showed that the power of this tactic could destroy the divine marrow of a god. However, he scoffed at this. If only it were that easy. At the very least, it would have to catch a god off guard and hit it. To explain, the divine marrow was actually the spirit core of a servant. The forest elves actually managed to research such a tactic without anyone noticing. As expected of the race that is best at using magic tactics, Rick said indifferently. It was unknown whether he was mocking or praising. Hint. The forest elves and fairy breeds once formed an alliance and researched a tactic to control the superior life forms. In the end, the Skywing breeds were extremely dissatisfied, and the fairy breed city was directly destroyed. In the end, the research on the tactic to control the superior life forms failed. After all, it made sense to be able to control those superior races who thought highly of themselves. Once the forest elves and fairy elves successfully researched them, whether it was the superior races or other biological races, none of them would agree. One was that they were unwilling to be controlled. How dare mere forest elves control them? The Skywing breeds with the most explosive and belligerent tempers would be the first to disagree. The other was fear. If the research was really successful, the forest elves and the superior life forms who were already watching and controlling them would be the end of the world for the other races. After all, the superior life forms were really strong. If they formed an alliance, the other life forms would definitely not be able to survive. Therefore, the matter of the forest elves and fairy breeds' research on controlling the superior life forms was discovered by the spies of the other races, and spread among the other races. The fairy breeds had withdrawn from the war because their vitality had been greatly damaged by the Skywing breeds. Their capital was gone, and the Skywing breeds were still attacking. If they did not run, they would be waiting for death. Therefore, the fairies withdrew from the war and went into hiding. Wuming, on the other hand, felt that it should be the races that withdrew from the war and went into hiding because their gods were gone. In order to create their own Lord God, they had to fight. If they found out that their Lord God had been killed by the enemy Lord God, Then what was the point of fighting? In short, according to Wuming's research and analysis, the forest elves did not seem to have used this weapon on the battlefield, because there were no records. It was the same for the goblins' marrow explosion. The forest goblins and goblins were most likely using these newly researched weapons as their secret trump cards, preparing to use them when they least expected it. Then this Void Ward Zeroth might very well be a modified version of the forest elves' failed research on controlling superior life forms, Wuming said. Then Zayubalas nodded and shook his head. Answer. The possibility of this conjecture is very high, but we don't have any specific information, so we can't come to a conclusion. No matter what, this is an extremely dangerous tactic, right? Rick asked. Zayubalas nodded faintly. This is an important piece of information, Rick. Wuming smiled. Rick fell into deep thought. Since he could remember, humans had been hiding from place to place until his hometown was affected by the war. He was lucky not to die, and he searched for more humans. Everyone worked hard to survive. However, Rick slowly grew up and continued to work hard. However, Rick did not know what was going on. He worked hard and became the leader of humans. Since he became the leader, he had the obligation to protect humans. He would let them live. Rick, who thought so, gradually became numb after seeing the cruelty of reality. Again and again, he ordered those who looked at him with a smile to die. However, Rick kept comforting himself that this was to let more people live. This was for the greater good. However, in order to allow more of the 1001 people to live, sacrificing fewer 999 people. Was that really for the greater good? Rick knew that this was another level of hypocrisy. Rick was numb. He was irritated, cried, gave up on himself, and even wanted to commit suicide. In this world, death was an escape, but he thought of the other people who were alive. They needed him as a leader, and it had been like this until today. In the past, people were constantly migrating. When they were affected, they quickly moved to a safe place and set up camp. However, in the face of the powerful tactics and weapons developed by the forest elves and gnomes, if the battlefield was near human life, then could humans still survive? They might not even have time to escape. However, there was no safe place in this world. The only safe place was the underworld. However, even if the soul came to the underworld, the dead body would still not be at peace in the human world. It would still be destroyed by the war that was comparable to a natural disaster. If this continued, next time, not only himself, but also his sister, Ivan, Ol, and everyone who was saved by Lord God would die. Rick stopped thinking. Hey Lord God, can you end this war? Rick lowered his head slightly. His bangs covered his eyes, making it difficult for others to see clearly. Rick had already given up. Even if Wuming really wanted something, as long as Wuming could end the war, he would do anything. I can. Wuming responded to Rick's expectations and said casually, the condition for ending the war is to decide the strongest person. Then I just need to kill all the other gods, and the war will naturally end. Wuming said coldly, with my current state in a few days, I will be able to kill all the other gods. Wuming raised his fist and showed a tyrannical smile. But is this really okay, Rick? Wuming said calmly, I have always thought that the war in this world can only be ended by the most insignificant power in this world. This is what I believe in. Although Wuming's purpose in coming to this world was to save humans, if he could see humans save themselves, then the humans in this world would not be destroyed. They would definitely be able to survive until the end. Rick was silent. He also wanted to end the war with his own hands, but he did not have the power to do so. Not to mention the gods, even the weaker demons and sea dwellers among the other races, could not be defeated by humans. As if he had seen through Rick's thoughts, Wuming smiled, and then said, Then Rick, let me tell you something. Defeating the other gods is not the only way to make the Star Cup appear. Rick raised his head when he heard that. Chapter 427. Riker raised his head and looked at Wuming. After a few seconds, Riker understood. Wuming had said before that the Star Cup was formed when the strongest person appeared. The elf corridor bred various gods, so it was inferred that the elf corridor was the strongest person. In that case, the representative would explode and the elf corridor would appear. With the appearance of the strongest person, the star cup would definitely appear. When the time comes, I will go and meet the god of war Artesius. As for you, you will be responsible for piercing the core of this planet and revealing the elf corridor. When the star cup appears, you will obtain the star cup. This way, the battle for the sole god on this planet will end. Wu Ming spoke Riker's mind and pointed out that Riker should obtain the star cup. Hey, wait a minute, why me? As a god, isn't it better for you to obtain the star cup? Riker said with some surprise. In fact, until now, Riker had not completely believed in Wu Ming. He really wanted to end this war, so even if the god in front of him wanted to become the sole god, Riker had no objections. Then I'm sorry, I have no intention of becoming the sole god of this planet. Wu Ming shrugged his shoulders with a half smile and half helplessly. This world was not one he was familiar with. It could be said that except for Riker and Zayubaruk, Wu Ming did not know anyone else. To become the sole god of this planet, there was no doubt that he would have to live and die with the planet. Wu Ming did not have the time for that. Although Wu Ming was benevolent, he was not a saint. It was impossible for him to spend too much effort on this world. There were other worlds that needed Wu Ming's help more. Perhaps Wu Ming would come back to visit in the future, but he would definitely not become the sole god and ruler of this planet. In addition, I still have to fight 2 rounds with Artesius. Otherwise, if the strongest god of war snatches the star cup, it will be troublesome, Wu Ming said seriously. And the main reason why I'm not going to get the star cup is that I'm not a native of this world. So it's very likely that I won't be able to hold the star cup. It's better to leave it to you. Wu Ming patted Rick's shoulder. Rick was silent for a moment before he nodded. Yes. Leave it to me. Wu Ming and Rick smiled at each other, their eyes filled with hope. This made Hubert Lutz tilt his head and look at the two strangely. Yes, but the power of humans alone is unable to penetrate the core and reveal the elven corridor, Zayubaruk said expressionlessly. In truth, it was not just humans. Even other races, such as the dragon spirits and the skywings, would barely be able to pierce through the Earth's core with their own strength. No, it would be impossible for them to do so. Meanwhile, the forest goblin's Zeroth protection of the void, and the goblin's marrow explosion relied on magic spells and magical technological products. They didn't need to pierce through the Earth's core, unless there was the help of a god. However, if the dragon spirit race's collapsing whistle, the skywing race's sky strike, the forest spirit race's Zeroth void barrier, the goblin race's marrow explosion, and other sure kill abilities of the various races were combined, and with the help of the gods, the Earth's core could be easily opened. But at that time, the planet would be almost finished. However, as long as one became the only god, they would immediately activate their authority to restore the planet. Then there would be no problem. Wu Ming thought so from the beginning, and Rick also thought of this after knowing about the marrow explosion and the Zeroth protection of the void. At that time, I'll help you with the matter of correcting the attacks. I'll definitely make those combined attacks hit the target. Wu Ming showed an expression of victory. I'll leave the rest to you, Rick. I'll obediently wait for your victory on the corpse of a god. Wu Ming squatted down and patted Hubert's head. Then he turned to Rick and said, "Don't worry. If it's you, it should be possible," Wu Ming teased. Facing Wu Ming's distrustful question, Rick smiled. "Leave it to me. I'll end this game." Now Rick showed an unprecedented smile. This was a smile from the bottom of his heart. By the way, Rick, I have something to ask of you," Wu Ming suddenly said. "What's the matter?" Rick looked at Wu Ming in confusion. "This child and I want to enter the life of you humans and experience life. Allow me to refuse." Before we finished, Rick interrupted Wu Ming's words. How can you do it so neatly?" Wu Ming smiled. Rick looked at Wu Ming with melancholy, then looked at Hubert, who was a Kikai race. "If it's you, Lord God, there's no problem." After all, Wu Ming's appearance looked like a human, and his speech and behavior were consistent with a human's. But Hubela's was. Rick looked at Hubert helplessly. Hubert tilted his head and looked at Rick in confusion. Hidden under the cloak is a mechanical body, stiff and lifeless, and a mechanical tone. Without a doubt, she is a Kikai race. Even if she disguises herself, once she enters the life of us humans, she will be easily exposed. You know how afraid humans are of other races in this era. If we don't chase her away, we won't be able to live a normal life. I clearly understood what Rick meant. Actually, Hubert had to disguise herself as an ordinary human girl, and no one could find out. After entering the human society, Hubert was destined to have more contact with people. This way, it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. In other words, it's fine as long as no one finds out, right? Wu Ming smiled. Well, that's what you say, but I don't think that a Kikai race can hide her identity. Rick touched his chin and looked at the items on Hubert's body. Data flowed through his eyes. A glowing disc on his right forehead that looked like a magic formation. A pair of wings on his back, and two tail-like threads near his tailbone that connected to the sprites. A Kikai race without a sprite was like a car without gasoline. It was useless. Then what about now? Wu Ming smiled. Then, through the hand on Hubert's head, Wu Ming transferred his magic power to Hubert's body, or rather, the art on Hubert's body. In an instant, Hubert's body lit up. It was so bright that Rick couldn't open his eyes. When the light gradually dissipated, Rick opened his eyes. Rick looked at the little girl standing beside Wu Ming in shock. Rose-colored hair, tattered clothes, no wings, no tail, no disc on her forehead, and with those big watery amber eyes. She was simply adorable. This should be fine, right? Wu Ming looked at Rick with a smile. If that's the case, yes, I guess. Rick smiled awkwardly. Then let's play a game. Wu Ming smiled. Chapter 428. Checkmate. Zayubrek said calmly. She picked up the chess piece created by Wu Ming's magic and killed Rick directly. It's cheating to let Jikai Seed play chess. Rick sighed helplessly as he looked at his chess piece that couldn't be more dead. This is a fair game. You have to abide by the rules, Rick. Wu Ming, who was sitting on the side and watching the game in boredom, said with a gloating smile. Damn it. You actually let Jikai Seed play chess with me. There should be a limit to cheating. Rick muttered helplessly. Okay, didn't you agree to it before? If Zayubrek wins, let her join the lives of humans. You have to accept your loss, Rick. You have to accept your loss, Zayubrek also said expressionlessly. That's right. Rick was excited because he saw chess that he hadn't seen for a long time. Then he agreed to the game and lost completely. After all, how could a human brain compare to a machine? Of course, there were exceptions, but this exception wasn't Rick. Yes, I know. I'll let Zayubrek join our lives. You said before that you wanted to join us. Then, I'll have to trouble you to look after her. Don't let her cause any trouble, Rick said helplessly. Through the exchange just now, Rick also knew the name of this Jikai seed. I'll try my best. Wu Ming looked at Rick with a smile and said irresponsible words. Sigh. Rick sighed helplessly. These two guys were indeed non-humans. If they turned into humans, they would definitely be problem children. That's right, Rick suddenly said. The name Zayubrek doesn't sound like a human's. And this tone. If you don't change it, it might leave suspicion in the crowd, Rick said earnestly. In this kind of era, not only was Rick suspicious, but the other ordinary people were also suspicious. If they saw something, the refugees would be in a panic. Rick believed in Wu Ming and also believed in Zayubrek, who was captured by Wu Ming, but this didn't mean that others could believe them. So, if it was possible, can you get Hublets to change it? Asked Leave. Are you all right, Hubrek? Wu Ming patted Hubrek's little head, looking at him. Answer: there's no problem. Zayubrek felt Wu Ming's head patting, and was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Then, first, remove the mechanical word at the beginning of the sentence, and then change the character to be timid and quiet. Is that okay? Wu Ming asked softly. Hubert nodded and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Hubrek opened his eyes again. Is this okay? When Zayubrek spoke again, it wasn't the same emotionless voice as before. Instead, it was the timid voice of a human girl that was mixed with cuteness. With Wuming's magic, Zayubaruk was no different from an ordinary, timid human girl. Well done, Zayubaruk. Wuming gently patted Zayubaruk's head as if he was facing his own sister. As for the name, you'll be called Shiobi from now on, and I'll be your brother, Villo. Remember that. Wuming treated Shiobi gently as if he had really become a brother. Shiobi. Remember. Rick raised his eyebrows as he looked at the two people who were acting like crazy. Until now, I still feel that you superior races really have too much of an advantage. Rick said in confusion. However, Wuming understood. Wasn't Rick referring to the series of tricks that Wuming and Zayubaruk had used? Although humans are weak, the spirit that they possess is something that non-human races like us can't compare to. I think that as the leader of the humans, you must also understand this principle. Wuming's words made Rick laugh. Well, that's true. Then it's almost time for us to go back. With that, Rick began to walk towards the stairs. Rick, I have some unfortunate news for you. Wuming suddenly called out to Rick. Huh? Rick stopped and turned around to look at Wuming in confusion. What is it? The weather outside is a little bad. Wuming revealed a mischievous smile. In the outside world, countless elven skeletons were like a snowstorm, wreaking havoc on the earth. Suddenly, a shadow flew out from the snowstorm. They were Rick, who was fully armed and riding the creature, and Shiobi, who was flying at full speed with Rick and the creature in his hands. Wah! Rick's scream was heard. About a few minutes later, Shiobi stopped and put the half-dead Rick and the equally half-dead creature on the ground. We're here, Shiobi said softly. I can't take it anymore. Rick weakly lay on the ground and said faintly. The creature had already fainted. Suddenly, a black door like a black hole appeared, and Wuming's figure appeared from inside. Yo, Rick, are you okay? Wuming looked at Rick lying on the ground with a mischievous smile and greeted him. Damn it. With such a convenient method. Why did you let me fly back while being carried by Shiobi? Rick raised his hand and asked. Teleportation door, because this door only allows me to pass through, so there's no other way. Wuming said with a smile. Of course, this statement was wrong. He simply wanted to see Rick suffer to satisfy his own mischievous interest. When Wuming, Shiobi, and Rick were preparing to leave the underground laboratory of the forest elves, Wuming discovered the situation outside in advance. According to Rick, it was a death ash storm. As mentioned before, the elven skeletons were like rain and snow when the weather changed, so it wasn't impossible for a situation similar to a blizzard to occur. Although Wuming used the excuse of with my defensive tactic, there's no need to worry at all, to let Shiobi directly carry Rick and his horse back here. It had to be said that the horse was coincidentally hidden by Rick, and was able to avoid the death ash storm. It should be known that ordinary humans would be completely corroded in a few seconds under such a death ash storm. The elven skeletons were just that terrifying. Speaking of which, your tactic is quite useful. Rick checked his divine body and was really fine. Not only that, but his horse was also fine. Shiobi too. Shiobi also looked at her own body, and was completely unharmed. By the way, although Shiobi was not afraid of the death ash storm, the elven skeletons could still cause surface abrasion to Shiobi. Hence, Wuming had also set up a tactic for her. Let's go back to the village first. Rick needs to rest well. Wuming looked again at Rick, who was dizzy from the high-speed movement. You bastard! You think it's caused by me? Rick roared angrily. It's Shiobi. Wuming pointed at Shiobi shamelessly. It's Shiobi. Shiobi nodded. In principle, Shiobi did indeed cause Rick to feel dizzy. I really lose to you guys. Chapter 429. Because Shiobi knew that they had to come directly to the cave that led to the village, Rick led the half-dead horse, and led Wuming and Shiobi into the cave. Along the way, Rick kept reminding Wuming and Shiobi, remember, don't say anything unnecessary and make everyone suspicious. Also, Vero, you have to keep an eye on Shiobi and don't let her go berserk. Also, if people greet you, you have to answer them politely. Rick, I seriously suspect that you think I'm an ignorant god. Wuming complained helplessly. Cough cough, I'm just worried. Ahaha. Rick laughed awkwardly. You're indeed not an ignorant god. You're a problematic god. Immediately after, Rick stopped. Wuming and Xiaobi, who were following behind Rick, also stopped. There was an old door in front of them. The large underground cave behind the door was Rick's village. Wuming had already noticed that when he was observing. Then let's go, Villo Xiaobi. With that said, Rick pushed open the old wooden door. Creak. Following the sound of the old wooden door, the cave appeared in front of Wuming and Xiaobi. Rick. It was still the voice that Wuming heard before. The woman named Crone, Rick's sister, threw herself into Rick's arms. She hugged Rick tightly and called out Rick's name worriedly. Okay, Crone. I'm fine. Rick comforted his sister in a fluster. Because he went out alone and there was no one else to look after him. She was even more worried. Wuming saw that Crone was unusually worried this time. She was even more worried than last time. The others only looked at Rick and Xiaobi from their posts. However, they were more curious about Wuming and Xiaobi. I told you to call me sister. Who are the two behind you? At this time, Crone noticed the two people behind Rick. Them. I met the wanderers on my way back. Their village was destroyed, so I brought them back. Following Rick's words, Wuming took off his brown hood and smiled at Crone. Hello, my name is Villo Solansword. This is my sister, Xiaobi Solansword. Nice to meet you. By the way, because the neat black cloak looked too flashy, Wuming purposely changed his and Xiaobi's cloaks to a refugee cloak. Brother and sister? That's great. Crone said enviously when she saw how dependent Xiaobi was on her brother. Then Xiaobi opened her mouth. Please advise me. While she was at it, Xiaobi pulled down her hood that appeared extremely large due to her figure, and hid behind Wuming. Then she was adorable to Crone. Wah. What's wrong with this child? She's too cute. Crone hugged Xiaobi and rubbed against her. This caused Rick to be shocked. Wuming cast a camouflage spell that could only change Xiaobi's appearance in human eyes. In other words, her body did not change. But fortunately, Xiaobi's body was based on human standards. In addition, Xiaobi was instructed by Wuming to put away the mechanical objects, such as wings and the rings on her head. Therefore, there was no need to worry about being discovered. Xiaobi could not understand Crone's actions. Seeing that Wuming did not give any instructions, she just let Crone hug her. As for Crone, she treated Xiaobi as a shy child and didn't pay much attention to him. Then, that Crone, it's about time to prepare a room for Villo and the others, Rick said nervously. He was afraid that the Kikai seed would treat Crone's actions as an enemy's attack and counterattack. To put it bluntly, Rick was still worried about Xiaobi's Kikai seed. He allowed Xiaobi to join because of Wuming. Otherwise, why would Rick allow a Kikai seed to join his village for a mere game? However, Rick had forgotten one thing. If it wasn't for Silent Sound, Xiaobi might have threatened Rick. Then, if Rick didn't agree, she would have played a game with him to determine the winner. The outcome wouldn't have changed. You're right. It's almost night. If we don't hurry, Villo and Xiaobi won't have a place to sleep. Then, Crone quickly let go of Xiaobi and prepared to help Wuming and Xiaobi tidy up the room. Crone, I have a storage room next door. There's a bed too. Tidy it up a little and you can let them use it, Rick suddenly said. Can we? If that's the case, where do we put the collected information? Crone asked. It seems that storage room isn't an ordinary storage room. It should store the information that Rick has been collecting. Wuming thought. Put the information in my room. I need to study it today. As if he thought of something, Rick revealed a smile full of fighting spirit. Rick. Crone was stunned when she saw Rick's smile. She hadn't seen Rick smile in a long time. What's wrong? Seeing Crone stunned, Rick stopped smiling and looked at Crone in confusion. Then Crone walked up to Rick step by step. She reached out her hands and touched Rick's face. Then she squeezed hard. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rick was shocked by Crone's sudden attack. His own sister's attack on his face was not a normal kind of pain. Speak. Are you someone pretending to be Rick? Give me back my brother. Crone stared at Rick mockingly. How could Rick not know that this was his sister's sudden prank? I admit defeat, sister. Rick put his hands together and begged for mercy. Humph, humph, humph. Not enough. As she spoke, Crone increased her strength. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Villo, help. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had his arms crossed in front of his chest as he watched the farce between the siblings with great interest. A few minutes later, in Rick's room, the originally tidy room was now filled with all kinds of scrolls of information, filling the room to the brim. This was the stuff that Crone moved from next door. She was still cleaning the room next door. Rick rubbed his cheeks as he studied the map in front of him in annoyance. Your sister is quite interesting, Wu Ming, who was sitting on the bed, said with a smile. Well, she hasn't been this happy in a long time. This pain is worth it. Rick now understood that Crone had become like that after seeing his smile. Although Crone usually looked cheerful, she was always worried about her family, her brother Rick. The reason why Rick let Crone go was because he blamed himself for showing his bad attitude to his family. If only my sister could always be like this. Rick smiled. That depends on you, Rick. As long as you're happy, your sister will be happy too. Wu Ming, who was on the bed, said with boredom. Xiaobi, on the other hand, sat beside Wu Ming obediently and didn't do anything else. Well, that's true. Then let's talk business, Lord God, Rick said seriously. Chapter 430. The first step in Wu Ming and Rick's plan was to prevent the humans from becoming the final battlefield. I already know about the secret weapons of the goblins and forest elves. However, that alone isn't enough to gather them together. As he spoke, Rick placed the map on the ground and showed it to Wu Ming. The Skywings are on the continent opposite Wuxia, your Ayla. If we want them to leave Wuxia, we'll need a plan, Rick said. The other races are either retreating from the battle, or are too few in number. Furthermore, they're unable to fight against the other powerful races, and want to reap the benefits. The only races with power are the Skywings, forest elves, and goblins. Wu Ming marked the territories of the three races on the map. To put it simply, as long as the forest elves and goblins are in conflict, they'll rope in some of the other races and form two camps, Rick said with a smile. This was a long-term understanding of the big picture. It was basically impossible to be wrong. Then, what we need to do now is to get the people of the various races on Wuxia to leave. That'll require us to gather information. Then Wu Ming and Rick looked at each other and smiled. Then, regarding the issue of manpower, I'll go select people to form a suicide squad later. After all, those races were scattered all over Wuxia. If Rick were to rely on himself, it would take a very long time. Assuming that Rick found out about the goblin's trump card, and revealed the information about the forest goblin's Zeroth protection of the void, then started to walk towards the forest goblin's territory. When he arrived at the forest goblin's territory, Rick would find that the two sides had already started fighting. The goblins, who were wary of the forest goblins, had won the battle and killed the forest goblins without leaving anything behind. That would completely mess up the plan. Hence, they needed manpower and messenger pigeons. Even so, Rick, you haven't forgotten about me, have you? I'm super strong. Wu Ming looked at Rick. Rick understood what Wu Ming meant. As long as Wu Ming displayed his destructive power, it would be easy for the other races to retreat. After all, no one wanted to live in an area with a bomb nearby. But isn't this the time to prove the possibility of humanity? Just wait and see. When I need you, I won't hold back. Rick smiled wantonly as he looked at Wu Ming. Then I'll wait and see. Wu Ming did not insist. He was here to save the humans, but he was not their nanny. It would be best if the humans could save themselves. If not, Wu Ming would step in. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Please come in, Rick said. Rick had told him that he had something to discuss with the Villo, so he told him to knock on the door first if he wanted to find him. Creak. The door was pushed open and Rick's sister, Crone, walked in. Villo, Xiaobi, the room is ready. You can use it later, Crone said gently. Yes, sorry to trouble you, Miss Crone. Wu Ming smiled at Crone. Thank you. Xiaobi had been told by Wu Ming that she had to say thank you in this situation. Wah, I can't, this child is too cute, Crone rushed up and hugged Shiobi, rubbing against her. Ugh. Shiobi made a silent protest. Ha ha ha, looks like Miss Crone likes my sister a lot. Then, can I trouble you to take her for a bath? Wuming smiled and suggested. This time not only Crone but even Rick was surprised. Can I? I'll take good care of this child. Crone was surprised because she was happy to be able to bathe such a cute child. Then I'll have to trouble you. By the way, this child is very shy. If possible, can you bathe Shiobi alone? Wuming smiled and nodded. No problem, no problem. I'll take good care of Shiobi. I promise to bathe Shiobi until she's white and clean. Crone rubbed against Shiobi again. Be good and listen to your sister, Shiobi. Wuming stared at Shiobi and said. Shiobi. Got it. Then Crone led Shiobi and left. Wait a minute, Villo. If we let Crone bathe Shiobi, won't we be exposed? Rick said in a panic. After all, even if he used a camouflage spell to change Shiobi's image in the eyes of others, once they were honest with each other, Crone who touched Shiobi would realize that something was wrong. Just like Shiobi's hair. Although it looked soft, it was actually made of ultra-tough metal wire. When she washed her hair, she would realize that something was wrong. Don't worry, Rick. I've already used suggestion magic on Crone. No matter how much I touch her, Crone will treat Shiobi as a human. Wuming said as he raised his hand and a ray of light appeared. This way, Shiobi will be able to better integrate into human life. What was that saying again? Being honest with each other was often a good way to increase trust. Just like the Japanese mixed bath. Cough cough. Back to the topic. Really, magic is so useful. Rick said enviously with his dead fish eyes. Let's continue. Then, Wuming and Rick sat opposite each other and continued their conversation. After a moment of conversation, Wuming understood Rick's meaning. Because we've considered that the other party will directly kill the informant, so we need to prepare more people? Wuming said. This was also why Rick needed a suicide squad. If there were too few people, the plan might fail. Yes, so I will gather some trustworthy people who can be part of the suicide squad and tell them about this, Rick said in a sorrowful tone. Therefore, these people were basically dead once they died. Rick's plan was for these people, including Rick himself, not to return to the village. They would be treated as dead ghosts, who went out to explore. In addition, because the skeleton of the elves had the effect of shielding their aura, they needed to cover their bodies with some skeleton of the elves when they faced people of different races during missions. This was what humans called black ash. However, the skeleton of the elves had strong corrosive properties. Covering it with acid was equivalent to covering one's body with it. After a long time, one would directly die. This was the true meaning of Suicide Squad and ghosts. They were not afraid of death and dared to act as ghosts and become real ghosts. Clank. A bottle of potion was placed on the table by Wuming and made a sound. This is. Rick looked at the blue bottle of potion in confusion. This is a potion that can be used to contact abnormal states. If it's the corrosion of the skeleton of the elves, it might be effective. Try it later, Wuming said. This bottle of potion was an item in the Yggdrasil game, specifically used to deal with abnormal conditions. Wuming thought that corrosion was also an abnormal state, so he took it out and asked Rick to try it. You've been a great help, Villo. Rick looked at Wuming excitedly, and then carefully picked up the bottle of blue potion. Wuming smiled when he saw how careful Rick was. Clank. Clank. The table was full of these potions. Clank. Clank. Rick was dumbfounded. You can have as many as you want. Don't be shy. Wuming smiled and pointed at the table. Wuming took all of the potions that Nazalik had. Since Nazalik could make more, Wuming took all of them. Damn it. You bastards. Then Rick's miserable cries could be heard. Chapter 431. Riker and Wuming went out to experiment. Riker smeared the black ash that could be seen everywhere on his hand, and then dripped a few drops of blue potion on the back of his hand. Instantly, the black ash disappeared, and the corrosive effect also disappeared. In the room, Wuming and Riker sat opposite each other. Shiobi sat beside Wuming in boredom. She had already been cleaned up by Crone and changed into her pajamas. Damn it, evil gods, go to hell. Riker muttered. Hey, that's about enough. You can't even handle such a small blow? Wu Ming smiled helplessly. The reason why Riker was like this was simply because Wu Ming's nouveau riche way of doing things provoked Riker. After all, in this war-torn era, everything was precious, and people cherished it very much. Based on the effect just now, if everyone covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of blue potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours. After that, the black ash would be eliminated by the power of the potion. After all, the effects of taking it inside the body and taking it outside the body were completely different. Riker was also thinking of the worst-case scenario. Therefore, if a person covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours before disappearing. Then use this amount as the standard and see the situation, Wu Ming said. After all, there was no need to cover the whole body with black ash. Not to mention the corrosive effect of the black ash. Even if the potion was effective, pain and scars would still be left. Moreover, for humans, the black ash only needed to cover a quarter of the body to completely conceal the aura, so that other races wouldn't be able to determine who the intruder was. For example, covering an arm to the chest, abdomen, and neck with black ash could almost completely conceal the aura of a human. Well, I will choose the members of the ghost tonight. Riker didn't dwell on the issue of Wu Ming's nouveau riche and became serious. Speaking of which, Riker, leave the forest essence to me. Wu Ming looked at Riker seriously. You don't believe me? Although he said so, Rick still understood Wu Ming's intention. The forest elves were actually an exceptionally cunning, or rather, suspicious and vengeful race. Even though the goblins had developed magic airships and the orcs had mastered advanced navigation technology, the forest goblins had also developed magic airships that could cover an entire forest. Although its performance was not as good as the goblins. But in reality, these races were not as easy to deal with as the forest fairies. To put it simply, the forest elves were not as easy to fool as the other races. Compared to Rick and the others, Wu Ming could at least escape unscathed. At least it's safer this way. I don't want you to come back half-dead or unable to come back. Wu Ming jokingly teased Rick. Then are you confident? Rick first smiled, then looked at Wu Ming seriously. Of course, Wu Ming said without hesitation, with a confident expression on his face. But I'll have to ask your ghost unit to cooperate with me a little. No problem. Shiobi didn't speak at the side. She just looked at the conversation between the two as if they were old friends who had been together for many years. Data flowed in her orange-yellow eyes. This is also a heart. Just like that, a great plan that could subvert all races was unveiled once again. The next morning, Wu Ming came out of his room early. Wu Ming didn't go to see the recruitment of the ghost last night. He just took a quick look and left with Shiobi. Coincidentally, because Wu Ming and Rick's rooms were next to each other, Wu Ming met Rick, who was about to leave his room as soon as he went out. Yo Rick, you're up early. Wu Ming greeted. You actually have the nerve to greet me. I originally wanted you and Zio to support me, but you actually sneaked away. Rick had a tragic expression. You don't know how nervous I was at that time. Everyone was looking at me. So many people only looked at me when I became the village chief. You don't know. Wu Ming didn't listen to Rick's complaints. Instead, he looked at Shiobi, who was holding his hand. By the way, this was suggested by Shiobi. Shiobi used the reason of shouldn't siblings hold hands? To let Wu Ming hold her hand. Is she afraid of crowds? Wu Ming said with interest. Shiobi doesn't know. Shiobi calmly shook her head. Right, Shiobi. How was your interaction with Crone yesterday? After all, Shiobi and Crone were honest with each other. They must have gotten along well. On the other hand, Shiobi seemed to have recalled something terrible. Wu Ming could clearly sense that Shiobi's body trembled slightly. Crone is so scary. Shiobi recalled how Crone hugged and played with Shiobi in the shower yesterday. She felt a lingering fear. Seeing Shiobi like this, Wu Ming could only smile awkwardly and didn't say anything else. Hey, don't ignore me. Suddenly Rick raised his voice. Oh, are you done, Rick? Wu Ming responded with a smile. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Rick shook his head. The ghost is ready. We only need an opportunity to act. After all, many people leaving the village was a matter of concern. Hence, they couldn't just let those who were willing to become ghosts leave the village. Wu-Ming brought 2 pieces of news to Rick. Good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Bad news. Rick answered without hesitation. I noticed a gnome worship nearby, as well as a few dragon gnomes. Perhaps because the 2 races had a conflict before, the gnomes and dragon gnomes didn't like each other. What Wu-Ming meant was that this time, the 2 would most likely affect the surrounding human villages, which were Rick's small villages. Hearing this, Rick frowned at first. Then his brows relaxed. Through this bad news, Rick also guessed the good news. That's right. It's just as you thought. After this attack, the ghosts can act. Wu-Ming smiled. Wu-Ming woke up early in the morning to tell Rick these 2 pieces of news. At this moment, the mountain where the village was located shook violently. Without a doubt, the gnomes and dragon gnomes nearby were fighting. You really have a crow's mouth. Rick didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Wu-Ming. He didn't know whether to praise or scold him. Chapter 432. Everyone leave from the west exit. Crone shouted, directing the panicking crowd to leave. Although Wu-Ming and Rick didn't wake up late, Crony and a portion of the villagers woke up even earlier than them. These villagers were mostly young men and women. The rest of the villagers were old, weak, sick, disabled, and children. The rest of the villagers were woken up by the tremors outside. Following the shouts of their loved ones, they hurriedly packed their luggage and left in the designated direction. This was because the humans in this world would be affected by the battles of other races after a period of time. Therefore, the humans had to prepare their luggage early in order to prepare for any unexpected situations. In this era, death was a common occurrence. It was even possible to lose one's life while sleeping. Therefore, the people were used to preparing their luggage early. Like people who were used to earthquakes, they didn't panic and left in an orderly manner. However, it could be seen that the humans in this world lived in a cruel world. Seeing that almost everyone was leaving, Crone noticed that Rick and the Villo siblings didn't leave. Did something happen? Crone said worriedly. According to Rick, the Villo and Shiobi were clear-headed, so he wanted to discuss some issues with them. Crone believed Rick's words. After all, if the Villo siblings weren't smart, they wouldn't be able to wander around in this chaotic world. Because idiots had already died in the hands of natural disasters, black and gray, and other races. Even if it was because they had overslept the previous night, it was impossible for Rick, Varen, and the others to not be affected by such a violent tremor. Therefore, the only answer was that something else had happened. Crone ran to Rick's room. Looking at the half-closed door, Crone trembled as she pushed the door open. Rick's body trembled as he knelt on the ground in grief, and let out a sorrowful cry. Damn it. How many more times do I have to go through this? Rick. Crone looked at her grief-stricken brother, and couldn't bear to see him like this. Crone hugged Rick from behind and comforted him. That's enough, Rick. Leave the rest to me. Then, the corners of Rick's mouth curved into a smile. Have you memorized it, Villo? After Rick finished speaking, Wu-Ming and Zio appeared at the door. At the same time, Wu-Ming was holding a pen and paper in his hand. Not a single word missing. Wu-Ming raised the paper in his hand at the same time. That's it, Crone. You're the next village chief. This is the map of the next village. The safest path is along the edge. Rick stood up and handed a map to Crone. Huh. Crone didn't even realize what had happened. That's it, Chloe. With that, Rick walked to the door and met up with Wu-Ming. Wait a minute. What the hell is going on? Rick, where are you going? Crone was extremely confused. Even though Crony's talent was enough for her to become the village chief, she still couldn't accept Rick's sudden departure. Just ending this game. Don't worry. Rick turned around and smiled wantonly. Don't worry. I still have a sister to take care of. I won't mess around with Rick. Wu-Ming raised his hand and suggested. This made Crone sigh in relief. She couldn't accept the sudden departure of a new friend. Then I'll leave Zio to you. Wuming pushed Zio into Krone's arms. Ha! Although Krone liked this cute child, she couldn't bear to see them messing around like this. And just as Krone was about to say something, Shiobi spoke. Please. You. Big sister. Krone. Shiobi stuttered shyly as she looked at Krone with her big watery eyes. Instantly, the suggestion magic that Wuming cast on Zio was activated. With Zio's cute performance, Krone, who was a normal person, seemed to have been charmed. Wah, leave it to me. Instantly, Krone shrieked as she hugged Zio and rubbed against her. I'm just sending Rick off. I'll be back soon. After Wuming finished speaking, Rick and Wuming left. After Wuming and Rick left, Krone reacted. You must return safely. She prayed to the running man. Outside, on the path of retreat. Due to the fight between the goblins and the dragon goblins, not only did the ordinary people have to return to the village, even Rick and the specters had to return to the specter's nest. Now, Wuming and Rick were walking on the path to the specter's nest. I wanted to ask, are you going back to the village? Rick looked at Wuming suspiciously. Therefore, according to the plan, Wuming had almost no time to leave Rick and the others and return to the village. I have my ability. I can create a clone of the same level as me, Wuming explained. Wuming's dependent avatar had the ability to split his avatar. Wuming was going to use that ability to send his avatar back to the village to take care of Shiobi. After all, Shiobi was just living with human beings. Not to mention whether Shiobi's avatar would be discovered by human beings. Moreover, Shiobi needed someone to enlighten her. It just so happens that I also have a question, Wuming said. Do you want me to record what you said just now? Isn't that something that can be forged in minutes? Only the heavens knew why there was a need for someone to record the words with a pen and paper as proof. Wuming wasn't wrong at all. That thing could be forged directly. It's just a title to replace the village chief. It's not that useful. Rick smiled slightly. You really have a bad taste. Wuming joked. Goddess Sama is not qualified to say that. Rick retorted. Ha ha ha, both of them laughed. When they came to the entrance of a cave, both Wuming and Rick stopped. Then I'll go first. Wuming looked away. Well, we will also launch a strategy against the goblins and the orcs in 5 days. Immediately, without saying much, Rick and Wuming walked into the cave with their backs facing each other. Rick walked directly into the cave, and Wuming flew directly into the sky and flew away. So they were really going to leave after sending him off. Chapter 433. After Wuming left the human gathering place, he directly returned to his true form and flew into the sky. Then, because of the plan, Wuming directly cancelled the various shielding techniques on his body. At the same time, Wuming also released his own energy, which was the holy aura. At that moment, Wuming was like a flame in the night, no, a fireball, which was extremely eye-catching. Now the goblins' air fleet is on the northern coast of Wuxia. Wuming remembered the map that Rick showed him. Wuming stayed in the air and looked to the north. Wuming's current location was south of Wuxia, which was not far from the northern coast. Let's mess around a little. With that said, Wuming spread his wings and quickly flew toward the north. In the south, Wuxia and Yar'ela intersected. It was an ocean, and the forest elves' fleet was sailing from that ocean. As the current chief octopal sorcerer of the forest elves, and the main researcher of the Zeroth Ward of the Void, Shinki Nirbalian's wisdom was naturally needless to say. She was also quite proud of herself, so she took on the heavy responsibility of the forest elves' fleet commander. However, she was rather fearful of the mysterious powerful being that the dragon spirit mentioned. After all, even though it was annoying to think of a musclehead who didn't have any intelligence and relied solely on brute strength, Shik had to admit that his powerful strength was indeed frightening. As a result, it was no longer appropriate for her to act freely in Wuxia. Shinki once suspected the identity of the mysterious powerhouse, but she could not tell which race he was from until the creator of the Sky Forest Elves, Canas, arrived. Her creator, the god Canas, had told her that the mysterious expert was not from another race, but a god from another world. However, The star cup of that planet did not work on him, so she did not have to worry about him competing for the star cup. Coincidentally, she received news recently that the forest elves' old rival, the goblins, was attacked. According to the spy's report, the goblins could not capture the other party's figure, and the fleet's instruments could only detect a large number of powerful energy sources. Those energy sources were not elves, but unknown energy sources. From this, Shinki judged that the dragon who attacked the goblins' fleet was the powerhouse from another world that Kanas mentioned. Therefore, Shinki decided to evacuate the forest elves from Wuxia. However, it seemed that the goblins' losses were not serious. Because of that, it just proved that the mysterious powerhouse was just passing by, and the reason for the attack was unknown. In any case, the forest elves enjoyed watching the forest elves. Shinki made such a decision in order not to let her people follow in their footsteps. So as the forest elves fleet, the elves airship fleet, the elves airship fleet, and headed to the Yar'ela continent. Naturally, Shinki had his own plans for heading towards the continent of Yar'ela. Godzazazaz, the Zeroth elves, the Zeroth god, was the elveses was the god. Standing at the front of the fleet, Shinki looked at the Wuxia continent. For the sake of our god, please bless us, Kanas. Shinki prayed to his god. And at that moment, not good. Lord Shinki. An ordinary forest elf soldier hurriedly ran to the bow of the ship. What's the matter? Don't panic. Shinki looked at the soldier unhappily. Yes. I'm sorry, Lord Shinki. The soldier calmed down and stood up straight. Tell me what happened. Shinki asked casually. It's like this, Lord Shinki. Our magic has detected an unknown energy source, and the amount is huge. The captain asked me to inform you. What did you say? In the captain's room of the Forest Elves' magic airship flagship, Shinki walked in a little panic, and his eyes suddenly rushed to the big screen. What the hell is going on? Shinki said with a little anger. At that moment, because of the confidentiality issue, there was only one captain left in the entire captain's room. And that captain didn't know why Shinki was angry, so the captain had to report truthfully. It's like this, Lord Shinki. We just detected a large non-elven energy source. I'm worried that it's that, so I asked the soldier to inform you. The captain said politely. Even he had to show respect to the Zeroth Shield's chiefs, 8 stages and the Zeroth elves. That was why Shinki roared angrily as soon as he came in. Shinki naturally understood what the other party meant by that. As the captain, Shinki naturally knew that the goblins were attacked, and he also knew that the goblins were also attacked after detecting a large non-elven energy source. The soldier didn't know the situation, so after being persuaded by Shinki, he reported very calmly. And Shinki naturally knew that the situation changed from the goblins, panic to the red-crowned cranes and the red-crowned cranes. That made Shinki feel like she was fooled, and that was why Shinki was so angry as soon as he entered the room. That didn't attack? Shinki frowned slightly and asked the captain. Because the goblins were attacked after detecting that energy source, Shinki was shocked that they weren't attacked. No, but the other party used a shielding spell. We can't use detection magic to see the other party's influence. We can only see with our eyes. The captain shook his head. The other party's identity is a mystery. Not only did it interfere with the battle between the dragon elves and Kakai elves, but it also attacked the goblins, and it's not one of us. The captain said in distress. Of course, the arrival of the god Kanas would not let the captain know. Although his status was slightly higher, it was not that high. In order to maintain a sense of mystery, only 10 people knew about the arrival of Kanas. Those 10 people were either powerful or strong, and Shinki, as the main developer of the Zeroth Shield, naturally knew about it. You don't have to worry about the other party's identity. The higher-ups have their own arrangements. Where is the other party now? Shinki changed the topic. The captain quickly checked the energy source, and as a result the captain was shocked, and his face changed. It's right here. What? Shinki was also surprised. The captain brought up the image, and the energy source just happened to coincide with the flagship. Yo, 2 forest elves. Chapter 434. Wu Ming's voice came from the captain's room. Who is it? The captain roared and looked towards the source of the voice. A young man with black hair and red pupils wearing a loose white shirt appeared out of thin air at the door of the captain's room and leaned against the wall of the captain's room. Oh, aren't you looking for me? Wu Ming smiled. Xianku frowned slightly and said to the captain without turning her head, "You can leave first." But Lord Xianku. Okay, I understand. The captain wasn't stupid and walked towards Wu Ming's position. That was the door. Wu Ming wasn't afraid that the captain would go home and call for reinforcements, because both sides knew that violence wouldn't solve the problem. The captain's room door opened, and the captain took a deep look at Wu Ming before leaving. Bam, tch. The captain's room door closed again. Now the only ones left in the captain's room were the Forest Elite's chief level 8 sorcerer Xianku nearby and Wu Ming. Then, Lord God, what can I do for you? Xianku politely bowed slightly and greeted Wu Ming. Don't be nervous, Wu Ming said calmly, then walked to the captain's room and sat down. I don't mean any harm. Wu Ming maintained a smile as if everything was within his control, and looked at Xianku with incomparable arrogance. You must be joking. Lord Canas has already told us about you. As a god from another world, you don't need to compete for the Star Cup, so please tell us your intentions. Xianku's words were still polite, but Wu Ming could hear the mockery in her words. You really dare to say that Canas' creation? Wu Ming was instantly angered. Although he still had a smile, the anger in his eyes and the aura he emitted made Xianku feel terrified. After all, Lord Canas is a supreme existence. We can't compare to you in terms of power or wisdom, so please forgive Xianku's offense. Xianku Nirba's meaning was clear. They were weak, so it was better to be straightforward with a powerful being like Canas, because they had to agree no matter what. Wu Ming naturally understood this, so he only got a little angry and calmed down. Then I'll be straightforward. Then I'll get straight to the point. I found something interesting in the air fleet of the goblins. It's an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. What? Xianku heard Wu Ming's words and couldn't stay calm. Not only was she surprised that Wu Ming knew about the Zeroth protection of the void, but she was also surprised that the goblins had an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. Don't worry. Even if I know about the Zeroth protection of the void, I won't do anything to you. Besides, I'm here for your own good this time. Wu Ming smiled and calmed Xianku down. Her beautiful face was solemn. Then, Lord Canas, are you going to tell us about the gophers? Xianku asked. There was another layer of meaning in this sentence. Even if you are helping us forest elves, do you have a purpose or something else? After all, it was impossible to give without expecting anything in return. There was no such thing as a free lunch. As a wise person, Xianku Nirba naturally understood this principle. Don't be nervous. You also know that I can't use this planet's Star Cup even if I obtain it. I don't have any other purpose. I'm just doing this for my own pleasure. Wu Ming shrugged and waved his hand. Pleasure? Xianku furrowed her brows in confusion. After all, I can't obtain any benefits from this world. I can only enjoy the pleasure this world brings me, Wu Ming explained. The goblins have developed a weapon that can explode divine marrow. It's called Marrow Explosion. The Marrow Explosion is all loaded in their aerial fleet and can be launched at any time. Wu Ming's words made Xianku slightly excited. Explode divine marrow? Xianku fell into deep thought. If that was the case, it would indeed have the same deterrence as the Zeroth protection of the void. It was better to believe it than not. They had to be cautious. Let me give you another reminder. The goblins already know that you have the Zeroth protection of the void. Wu Ming's words gave Xianku another heavy blow. How is that possible? Xianku thought that her forest goblin's defense system and anti-spy system were perfect. Therefore, Xianku didn't think that anyone would be able to sneak in and discover their secret weapon. The Zeroth protection of the void was correct. Since you can send spies to the other side can naturally send spies as well. Don't be too complacent, forest goblins, Wu Ming warned. All in all, just be careful. I don't want this good show to be ruined. With that, Wu-ming stood up and prepared to leave. Thank you for the information, sir. Xian bowed deeply to Wu-ming. However, her voluptuous chest swayed in front of Wu-ming's face. Cough cough. It's nothing. After all, I was very bored when I accidentally got lost in this world. How can I not find some entertainment for myself? I hope you won't disappoint me. With that, a black space appeared in front of Wu-ming. The space swallowed Wu-ming and the black door disappeared. It seemed that the other party relied on this thing to enter. Why didn't the comfortable version of shielding space teleportation work? Could it be that it wasn't space teleportation? Xian began to think hard. However, this was none of Wu-ming's business. Phew. Wu-ming let out a long sigh. Seriously, I'm really not suited to play the bad guy. At this moment, Wu-ming leaned against a tree and rested. Suddenly, a golden light appeared on Wu-ming's arm and a clear voice said, Sir Wu-ming, you were lying to that young lady, right? Of course. I just went to the goblin's place to cover it up. You've been following me all this time. Other than the fact that the goblins have marrow explosion, everything else was a lie. Wu-ming smiled proudly. Including his easily angered and arrogant behavior, as well as the spy's information and his own goal. None of it could be said to be true. As for the fact that he couldn't use the star cup, Wu-ming hadn't even seen it before. Who knew if he could use it? In any case, Wu-ming had no intention of using the star cup. After all, the forest goblins have many wise people. Being able to create the Zeroth Ward of the Void and use a fake name, Xian Nobarian, is a wise person among wise people. If I don't tell her this, she probably won't believe me. Even if Wu-ming gave Xian the impression that he was an easily angered, arrogant, rude, and vulgar god from another world, Xian would still listen to him. After all, it was better to believe it than not. It would be troublesome if she failed miserably. I've done what I should. The rest will be left to Rick. What I should do now is to meet Artemisia. Chapter 435. In a secret cave somewhere, Rick and Wu-ming sat opposite each other. In front of them was a map that was larger than an ordinary one. On the map were chess pieces carved from crystals of different colors. These chess pieces represented the various races. Now, there were no more chess pieces representing the various races on the Wuxia continent on the map. In other words, the major races had already withdrawn from the Wuxia continent. There were basically no large races left on the continent where humans were. In that case, the first step is complete, Wu-ming said calmly. The goal of not letting the continent where humans were located become a battlefield had been achieved. The battlefield on the Yar'ela continent has also been formed. Rick smiled as if everything was under his control. In the southeast of the Yar continent, there were chess pieces representing the forest elves, fairy elves, and dragon elves. The forest elves entered the southeast of the Yar continent through the southern part of the Wuxia continent, and pulled out the fairy elves, who had retired from their hidden nests, to join the Forest Elves Alliance. With the idea that the enemy of their enemy was their friend, the Forest Elves pulled in the Dragon Elves, who were at odds with the goblins. However, there were very few Dragon Elves. The three forces were entrenched in the southeast of the Yar'ela continent, led by the Forest Elves. In the northeast of the Yar'ela continent, there were chess pieces representing the goblins, giants, and fantasy breeds. The goblins were originally entrenched in the northwest of the Wuxia continent. Due to Wu-ming's attack and the orcs' discovery of their secret weapon, marrow explosion, the goblin fleet had no choice but to set sail to the northwest of the Yar'ela continent. As the giants had always been on good terms with the goblins, the two quickly began to form an alliance. The fantasy breeds joined because the goblins exposed the forest elves' magic technique, the Zeroth Ward of the Void, to the fantasy breeds. The Zeroth Ward of the Void, which was based on controlling the self-destruction of fantasy breeds, was something that the fantasy breeds hated. Therefore, the fantasy breeds joined the goblins' alliance. However, fantasy breeds were rare to begin with, so the forest elves and goblins were currently evenly matched. In addition to these three forces, there was also the native force of the Yar'ela continent, Artheus, and the skywing species under his command. The skywing species occupied the body of a huge fantasy breed called a Bontiheim. This fantasy breed was an apostle subdued by the god of war, Arthas. It had followed Arthas since ancient times, acting as a gathering place for the skywing species under his command. This third force seemed to have very few people. It consisted of Arthas, skywing breeds, and a fantasy breed. However, even without Arthas, the skywing breeds were still extremely powerful existences. Aside from the skywings, there were very few other life forms, such as fantasy breeds, dragon breeds, and giant breeds. These life forms basically did not have a fixed gathering place, and even if they moved together, there would not be more than a dozen of them. As for the skywings, because they had a gathering place, they would basically move out in groups and hunt for heads. It could be said that no one was willing to provoke the skywings. That was why the forest goblins and goblins were on Wuxia and not your Ayla. However, war was a collective battle, so the skywings might be slightly weaker. However, the skywings still had a powerful ability that they could use as a group, Skystrike. The old capital of the forest goblins, Marilon, was destroyed by a skywing Skystrike. If Arthas was included, then it would be impossible to calculate. In this world, the gods were born from the elven corridor, and the gods that were born had their own characteristics, concepts, and so on. The creations of the gods were often the same as the gods. For example, the creator of the goblins, God Okan, had the title of God of Forging. The goblins were also experts in the field of forging. The magic airships were the first to be researched by the goblins. The magic airships of the forest goblins were actually just using magic to make the warships fly, unlike the goblins' magic airships that use fuel ores as a power source. Canas was the god of the forest, and her creations were the elves that were close to the forest. As the god of wisdom, she could use 168 types of spells at the same time, which was the so-called 168 types of spellcasters. It should be known that the strongest of the forest goblins was the 8th type of spellcasters. That was how wise Canas was. As for the Kakai race, their god initially wanted to find someone to answer his questions, so he created 5 small machines. However, he realized that these 5 small machines could not answer his questions. Therefore, the god passed through his own spirit and died. Then, those 5 small machines developed into the current Kakai race. The god of war was naturally born from hatred, hostility, malice, blood, and other things related to war. That was why Arthas was crowned as the strongest. Therefore, the power of war was often terrifying, more terrifying than wisdom, forging, and so on. Meanwhile, the forest elves had developed the Zeroth Void Blessing, while the goblins had developed the Marrow Explosion. Both of them were confident in themselves, which was why Silent and Rick had pushed them to the Iliala continent to face off against the Skywings. Now this could be considered the final war. That was because the remaining races basically all withdrew from the final war for their own reasons. The Sea Dwellers were not interested in the continent, and did not want to participate in the war, so they lived in the deep sea. The Moon Song race had always lived on the huge red moon, standing aloof from worldly affairs. The vampires lost in the war and could not participate in the war. As for the demons, those things were actually just demons and monsters, so why would they care about the war? By the way, the beastmen fled directly from the sea. They were originally not far from the goblins, so when Rick and the others leaked the information about the Marrow Explosion, they quickly gathered their entire race and retreated from the sea. As for the Kakai race, they did not provoke others, and others did not provoke them, so they lived in peace. Coincidentally, almost all of these races were races whose gods had died. It was precisely because their gods had died that they chose to preserve themselves. After all, the prize of the war was for the gods, and they might not necessarily use it even if it was given to them. The 3 forces are already in their own positions, and are on guard against each other. Now all we need is a catalyst, and the final war will begin. Then, Rick looked at Wuming. Wuming was such a catalyst. Then, there's no time to lose. Let's begin tonight, Wuming said with a nod. Then, Wuming directly entered his spatial door, and left the cave. The future of humanity will be decided tonight. Chapter 436. The sunset and night fell. In the Yar-Ala continent, Wuming floated in the air as he looked at the massive creatures in the sky. Abendheim, the gnome fleet, and the forest elves' magic airship had all settled down peacefully, forming a tripartite balance of forces. Even so, Wuming was still only interested in Arthas. Wuming had learned from studying the forest elf Zeroth Void Blessing that the technique had extremely high lethality, but it was fine if he couldn't hit it. As for the gnome's marrow explosion, Wuming estimated that it could match the Zeroth Void Blessing, but it was still the same. It was fine if he couldn't hit it. If it was just a defenseless Arthas, then the Zeroth Ward of the Void and Marrow Explosion might have been effective. However, against a group of Skywing species that could use Sky Strike, as well as Arthas behind the Skywing species, the forest goblins and goblins would have a hard time hitting their targets. However, Wuming didn't care if the forest elves and gnomes could kill the Godslayer, or if Arthas could defeat the 6 major races. These had nothing to do with Wuming. Wuming's goal had always been clear, and that was to help Rick and let the humans obtain victory with their own hands. That was all. In this way, the Kikai species that could replicate the techniques of other races would come in handy. After all, what better way to signal the start of a battle than when the enemy released their signature technique? However, Wuming only knew one Kikai species, and that was Zayubala's or Shiobi. However, Wuming didn't want Shiobi to participate in the battle. As Wuming had an avatar, he was very clear about Shiobi's current state. The human villagers' care and enthusiasm for Shiobi made Shiobi, who had long developed a desire to explore her heart, surge like a lake that had been opened. At present, Shiobi often had situations where data kept flowing in her eyes, her head heated up, and her body trembled as she said, "Error, error." Fortunately, Wuming's clone was there. Through Wuming's Lune runes and Yggdrasil, world tree magic, the villagers didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. Even Crony, who hugged Shiobi to sleep almost every night and often bathed with him, didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. In addition, Wuming would guide her from time to time. Wuming believed that Shiobi had already obtained imperfect feelings. The reason was in Wuming's hands. "Thank you, Shiobi." Wuming took out a metal sphere and thanked Shiobi, who was far away on Lucia. The metal sphere in Wuming's hand was given to him by Zio. "Nameless needs this. I'll give it to you." Although Shiobi had feelings for him, she still had that submissive personality, although she liked it this way. After all, we're siblings, aren't we? Then Shiobi handed the metal sphere to Wuming's clone. At that time, Wuming's clone looked at Shiobi with an indescribable gaze, but Shiobi only smiled. The clone believed that it was the most beautiful smile Wuming had ever seen in this world. Although it was a clone, the clone was still Wuming. Therefore, other than knowing that he was a clone, he was basically the real Wuming. Therefore, Wuming's clone accepted Shiobi's gift and patted her head. "Thank you, Shiobi." In order to let Shiobi stay here with peace of mind, Wuming's clone accepted the metal sphere, and immediately used a teleportation door to transfer the metal sphere to Wuming's hand. He also explained to Shiobi the truth that he was a clone. Shiobi didn't feel depressed. Even if you're a clone, your love for Shiobi isn't any less than your main body. This made Wuming's doppelganger extremely touched. We can't disappoint the young lady's kind intentions. At this moment, Wuming said as he injected magic into the metal ball. Although it wasn't, Wuming's special ability allowed devil power to use these devices that relied on power. In an instant, the metal sphere turned into a simple armor and stuck tightly to Wuming's body. This feeling, is it the Jikai type? Wuming extended his hand and moved his arm that was already covered in metal. When the clone gave Wuming the metal sphere, he didn't tell Wuming how to use it. He simply told him to inject devil power into it. He didn't expect it to be an external armor of the Jikai type. However, it didn't seem to be just that. With his mind, a lens appeared in Wuming's left eye. Through the lens, Wuming could see things like analysis. However, because Wuming wasn't a Jikai type, he couldn't understand the data. "I see. Is part of the Jikai type's ability in this armor?" Wuming understood the function of this thing. The metal sphere from before could be said to be a byproduct of Shiobi's split. It could also be said to be an inferior version of the Jikai type. Wu-Ming was no longer surprised by the Jikai type that evolved from just 5 small square boxes. The Jikai type was a bug. Because Wu-Ming didn't have the Jikai type's calculation ability, he couldn't inherit all of this power. However, it was still possible to use a weapon. Wu-Ming raised his 2 arms that were covered in thin metal and aimed at the gnomes and forest spirits. Let me try. Something that contains Shiobi's feelings. Pseudo Sky Strike. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, the magic power in his body burned fiercely like fuel. Wu-Ming's entire body shone like a bright star in the night. Then, 2 long sniper rifle barrels extended from Wu-Ming's palms. Simulating the Sky Strike of the Skywing type, the 2 forces instantly condensed, and then, boom! 2 huge cannonball-like sounds resounded through the sky. 2 meteors flew straight toward the forest spirits' magic airships and the gnomes' magic fleet. Boom! There were violent roars on both sides and flames shone in the night. From the flames, Wu-Ming could vaguely see that a few of the gnomes' ships had fallen. On the other hand, the magic airship of the forest fairies was fine. It made sense. The forest spirits' airships were definitely filled with defensive spells. Even if the gnomes' fleet had defensive spells, they wouldn't be able to use them as well as the forest spirits. After all, Wu-Ming's previous attack had expended a lot of magic power, but it had only brought down a few of the gnomes' magic airships. Is it because of the imitation? Wu-Ming looked at the gun barrel that was still smoking due to the overload. However, he had achieved his goal, which was to start this war that wouldn't start for a long time. Wu-Ming looked at the gigantic whale-like fantasy breed, Abendheim. After removing the armor on his body and placing the metal ball into the golden ripples, Wu-Ming created another clone, and his main body flew toward Abendheim. The clone that had 50% of Wu-Ming's main body remained where it was. The only difference was that the left arm of the clone was covered in a black glove. Plan B had begun. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.